Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, May 6th, 2021, and it's approximately 7:33 a.m., and I'm going to call the Concord Middle School Building Committee meeting to order. I will call roll. Stephen Crean.
Yes, I couldn't find the mute. I'm here. Sorry.
Sorry to catch you off guard. Jared Stanton?
Yes, here.
Good morning. Matt Johnson?
Present.
Hi, Matt. Lori Hunter?
Here.
Thank you. Justin Cameron?
Good morning.
Good morning. John Harris?
Here.
Thank you. Russ Hughes?
Here.
Hi, Russ. Kate
Hi.
Hanley?
Morning.
Hi, good morning. Peter Fashalis?
Good morning.
Good morning. Court Booth?
Present.
Thank you, Court. Heather Bout?
Here. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Heather. Frank Cannon? I see you, Frank. You're on mute, but I see you. Frank is here. He probably is looking for mute to unmute. Frank's here. Chris Popoff?
Here. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris. Charlie Parker?
Present.
Thank you, Charlie. Matt Root?
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Matt. Pat Nelson, as she's drinking coffee. And Don Guariello, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. So we'll get our meeting underway. The first order of business is the approval of minutes, but if you logged on a couple minutes early, there were some questions whether we received those yet. There were edits that needed to be made to the April 15th meeting minutes, which we received yesterday afternoon. Didn't have a chance to forward, recognizing that folks may not have time to have reviewed those. So you'll see those come today, probably after the meeting, your way. And then we have yet to see last week's April 29th. So those will come to follow as well. The turnaround on these is asking a lot. It's only a week in between sometimes. So we will defer approval of those minutes so that you can either have time to review the April 15th appropriately, as well as receive and read through the April 29th. So we'll look at approving those next meeting. Heather, I haven't reached out to you, but I assume you're
ready.
Prepared. Good for you. Good morning.
Much easier this week. I didn't have much to prepare. We actually only had 3 emails that came in through our email to everybody. 2 of them right after the meeting last time, actually on the 29th, but 2 of them asking us again to continue looking at keeping costs down and making tough choices. The 3rd asking us to make sure that we support the arts in a larger auditorium. And of course, the last one you forwarded to us, which I'm sure you will mention from the select board, so I won't get into that.
Great.
I'm
Thank
quick
you.
today.
Excellent. Thank you for that correspondence update. So with that, we'll move right along to the select board update. So Pat had sent around an email late last week letting everyone know that the select board had a discussion on their agenda for this past Monday's meeting. And if you weren't able to tune in, Pat and Lori and myself were, so that was good. And I have actually asked Matt if he'd be willing to give us an update on that. And you should have all received a letter from the select board, which I hope you've had time to read so we can discuss. But Matt, would you mind giving us an update?
Yeah, that's fine, Dawn. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah, as Dawn mentioned, we had a topic on our agenda last week for a Concord Middle School Building Committee update. And Dawn and Pat gave us the sort of rundown of where the committee has come to this point. You all know that better than anyone else. And then we had a discussion where we talked about the scope, the impact on taxpayers potentially of the work of the project itself, and about whether the select board had a consensus perspective that they would like to share with the building committee. And I think for those of you who watched the tape or were there present at the meeting, I think you saw that there are a range of opinions on the select board. And also, I think that there's differing perspectives as well about the nature of the relationship between the select board and the committees that it appoints, and reticence, of course, about micromanaging anything that the middle school building committee does, because certainly everybody has a job to do, and you're doing that job. So but nonetheless, Terry Ackerman proposed that the select board send a letter to the middle school building committee expressing the desire to keep the maximum cost of the middle school total project budget or total project cost below or at or below $100 million. And so the letter that you've received today or earlier yesterday reflects that goal. And I think that we also had another thing that was in the motion that's not reflected directly in the letter, which was that we do also want to work together with the finance committee and the middle school building committee to seek all other sources of funding, in order to help offset the cost impacts on the town. But that said, those are all things that have to happen in the future. So I think that, that wasn't in the letter itself, but that is right for now. Of course, really the focus is on trying to make the hard choices, I think, that were mentioned. That I think that was the phrase used in the letter, in order to keep those costs down. And we acknowledge the amount of community input that the committee has received, but also have concern about the long-term impact on capital expenses for the town. So I can answer further questions, but I just think it was short and sweet. It's not like we need to walk through everything that's happened up until now. It's really just registering another point of view.
Matt, is it okay if I read the letter for the folks on the line who weren't, aren't on the committee and wouldn't have received this?
I can share it out loud if you, I could share it in, over the screen if.
Whatever you like. I'm happy to read it. I did that with the finance committee letter,
Okay.
just for the sake of anyone that's tuning in that wasn't, isn't on our committee or wasn't CC'd. So I'm happy to do that. If you want to share it, that's fine as well, but I'll just go ahead and read it.
And see if I could share it.
Okay. So the letter was addressed to myself, Pat Nelson, the co-chairs of the middle school committee, and copied the select board members, Lori Hunter, Stephen Crane, Carrie LaFleur. And it's from Linda Escobedo. I want to make sure I say your name right, Linda, the select board chair on behalf of the select board. And it was dated May 5th. And the subject is feasibility and pre-schematic design space and budget deliberation. So Dawn, Pat, and members of the middle school building committee, as you're aware, the May 5th select board meeting included a summary update and ensuing discussion on the most recent middle school building committee's meeting of April 29th, and we thank you for adding to that update. Understandably, the select board has been following the work of the committee closely, given the importance and ramifications for years to come of decisions made about this new middle school project. The select board has also received significant community correspondence and feedback, particularly since the middle school building committee initially approved the education space plan and has engaged in more specific discussions about possible space additions / changes and the projected budget for the project. We applaud both the level of community engagement and the deliberative process of the middle school building committee and its responsiveness to feedback received. That said, the select board is keenly aware of the public's concern about the impact of a project of this magnitude will have on its residents' annual tax bill for a minimum of 20 years and strongly encourages the middle school building committee to target a total project budget of $100 million to the extent possible. Integral to this recommendation is an understanding that the committee will make the hard decisions it must while genuinely being open to the community feedback received to date. This may also include possible modifications to the building / educational space plan as needed. The Select Board will continue to encourage additional discussion among the school, town, and finance entities regarding funding mechanisms for the new middle school project. Cognizant of the fact that the Middle School Building Committee hopes to soon move into the feasibility study phase. I actually think it wants to say schematic design phase.
Yes.
Yes, I noticed that yesterday, of its tasks where more design details to inform its decisions will be available. We have nonetheless given this recommendation in the spirit of getting us to successful project adoption in the future. Committee members' continued stance to work through key decisions together with compromise where necessary is the path to this goal. We thank you for all your due diligence in pursuing the charge of this committee and look forward to a new middle school building project to support Concord's expectations for a strong educational program and excellence in student learning outcomes. So there we have it. That was received and forwarded to the group. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments. It sort of leads us into the next agenda item, which is about the schematic design scope, but I don't want to leave this before asking if anyone has questions or comments or wants to say anything.
And I should just mention that it was a unanimous decision to send the letter.
Correct. Thank you. Anyone? No questions, no comments? And I know Linda is on the line. If you want to say anything, Linda, I would open the floor to you if you feel the need, but I don't want you to feel any pressure to have to say something. Just want to recognize that you're in the audience today, and if you want to say anything, I'm happy to open the floor to you. Otherwise, we can. Oh. I see you now. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, all. Yes, thank you for catching the typo there. In terms, clearly should have said schematic design, and I also should have said the May 3rd meeting of the Select Board. Anyway, the substance is there, and I think I think we were also trying, and Matt has done a good summary of our discussion. But as you can see in the letter, I think we are also trying to think about getting all of us to yes in terms of the entire town on this project. And I think that the committee has done a wonderful job of being open to the significant amount of correspondence and viewpoints that have come in. But that openness now needs to translate into some decisions that take, I think, the community-wide input into consideration, which I'm sure you're going to do. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. And we completely agree. We want to move forward to a yes. So thank you for making that point. I think all of us are in agreement on that. So we appreciate your support.
Yeah, good.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay.
I'd like to say,
yes, Pat.
yeah, let me say a few things. I was at the meeting, and I was at the Finance Committee meeting. And I want to say that both of the Select Board and the Finance Committee are very respectful of the work that we've done, and very appreciative of the work that we've done. And we should feel really good about that. We've heard now from our two key committees in town, and I think it's really important that we consider what that means for us. And I would really like to hear from members of our committee a reaction to these two requests, so that we could maybe discuss this a little bit more amongst ourselves before we move to what I hope will be a decision today. So for me, it's very serious that the Finance Committee and the Select Board have asked us to keep the project at 100 million. I'm also not convinced that we can do that and in any way honor the communications that we've received from the town. But I think that we should try to get as close as we possibly can. when the finance committee and the select board come out with strong statements like this in Concord, that's meaningful. We are the committee that will make the decision. You guys are the committee that will make the decision. So this is our opportunity now to explore this a little bit more, or we can just go on and nobody can talk. So I'm urging people to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Well, Pat, you know, I'm not bashful. I am encouraged. I think that we might be closer to balancing different constituent hopes. And I think we are at the hope stage right now, meaning I believe we've satisfied the educational requirements very nicely. I think there's consensus around that. And so now it's contingent upon us to see if we can look at the space summary and perhaps make some accommodations that everybody would consider reasonable. Everybody would consider best effort. I think we're close, and you know, I'm eager to see what we can do.
Thanks, Court.
And it's not going to be without some accommodation by all parties. Even at 100 million, this is a big lift for many people in this town, and many people in this town are seeking better facilities. So we knew this tension from day one. So I don't think any of us are surprised actually that we've arrived here.
Yeah, it seems to me that based on our vote and our direction, that we are being extremely mindful of the costs. And I want to be clear that when we made the motion to not to exceed 108, that doesn't mean we wanted to spend 108. And in my view, I think it was a very clear message to the architects and the team to say, we've heard this community input. We want to accommodate them as much as we can, and we want to look at all aspects of the building to be as fiscally prudent as possible. And so I think the message we've been sending to them is the right one, and I'm anxious to see what they're able to come up with. I also think we ought to look back at history a little bit and be mindful of some past events. And it reminds me a little bit of I think it was 1999, 2000 master plan, when we were going to spend $60 million and do two new middle schools, one renovation, two new elementary schools, one renovation of the other, Willard Elementary School, and a new middle school for $60 million. And there was a lot of talk at that time about how that was way too expensive. And ultimately, it got defeated. And I believe the primary reason was because we actually didn't go far enough. And we should have built 3 new elementary schools rather than doing a renovation of Willard. And that block of voters felt like they weren't accommodated properly and helped defeat it. And so we want to be extremely mindful that we've heard from hundreds of people within the community. And I recognize that our community is a big one with lots of different stakeholders. But we heard very vocal input about the support for the arts and the support for the gym. And so I don't want to let that get overshadowed in any way. That's an important constituent that doesn't want to just do the adequate job in the base amount. So I feel like we're at a good point, and it's good that everybody's weighing in. And I'm anxious to see where we can find cost savings, because I too want to see this thing done as fiscally prudent as possible. I mean, one of the things I think about is, and again, I came into the process late, so I don't know all the design efforts that were put into it. But when I hear $3 million for a bridge, I think about, well, maybe that's an area where we could look at. So anyway, that's my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. I guess I just want to understand that 3 million for a bridge a little bit. Has that been put out there as a cost?
I don't know.
I guess I'm looking at Kristen. That's not something I've heard before. So I just
want of those factoids I picked up, I think, during a conversation at a meeting. So it may or may not be accurate. So I apologize.
Okay. I don't want to, you know, even amongst our committee, put information out that hasn't been.
Well, I was the one who said that publicly here, and it was based on an estimate from people that had talked to me associated with the construction industry. I didn't claim it was an exact quote, but yes, it did originate with me, that particular number. Because I too have brought that up when I suggested that to open up the space summary and to open up the budget, so to speak, because they certainly can't be uncoupled, that we might look at other aspects of the building that have already been put to bed. The idea being, if we're opening up one element and looking for problem solving, do we do better problem solving if we put many elements on the table to see what's achievable?
I'll just say that this is where it's so important as we go through this process that we're really sticking to facts. This is sort of one of my bugaboos, is that we have a really difficult decision to make, and so I want to look to make sure that we know exactly what we're talking about at any moment. And I'm not faulting you, Cord or Peter. I mean, lots of numbers have been bandying around. There's been lots of discussion. But
I told you exactly where it came from.
Yeah, no.
And,
so
and it was clear. It was clear that day, although perhaps Peter had just arrived.
I have a comment that I'd like to make, or a couple of questions, if we can move on. You know, when I read those letters and listen to those comments from those two committees and boards, what comes forth to me are a couple of implications for us in terms of what we need to do. And I think we talk a lot about process, but you know, I think there are some fairly significant process questions here that we need to get through to enable us to make the decisions that we need to make. And I think those two implications are, number one, what are we going to do about sizing for these two so-called community options? I don't consider them community options per se. I consider them to be school options that the community has provided comment on. But you know, I think we need to decide, is this committee going to make that decision? Is this committee going to review the documentation on these spaces, or is someone else going to do this? And I, for one, don't think that we necessarily want to outsource the decision about those two spaces to you know, some other entities. I think it's really our decision. Second,
it is ours. That's our charge.
Good. I think it is our decision. I think we need to get granular about it, and however we choose to do it, we should understand what our process is and what our time frame is for doing that. And I would hope that we would make that decision before we exit feasibility. Number two, the second implication is, what is the process by which we're going to make these space trade-offs? I think that the Selectman's letter indicated that there's some hard decisions to make within the existing you know, space framework, and you know, someone needs to open that document and start peeling apart the alternatives and deciding, well, what do we need based on the gym and auditorium decisions, and you know, how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna make those decisions? And again, I don't
Can I
think that should be
interrupt for a minute?
outsourced. Yeah, I just don't think that should be outsourced either. I think these are
It's
our
not.
decisions.
They
So,
are. And I'm going to open the floor to Lori to
those
talk about that.
are my comments about implications.
Okay, as far as process, that's all ours. That's our committee. That's what we're here to decide, to allow the designers and OPM to move us into schematic design. Lori, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wasn't sure when we were going to do this, so now is the time. I was charged and asked and volunteered to go back to the ed plan, and so we've done that this past week. Been working with Kristen and Justin and Phil. We did go at it with a different lens, I think much in the mode of all you've talked about, knowing we were looking for ways to get to yes, I think someone said earlier. So here's where we're at. I hope this is helpful because it was hard, so I hope it was helpful. We've looked again at alt PE. If the gym gets bigger and we hold on, there is so multiple things play in here. So it's not only alternative opportunities for fitness and health aside from the gym, but it's also where we were proposing physical therapy for special education. So if the gym gets bigger, we feel that there's options there creatively. And I don't think we have all that figured out, but Kristen was throwing some creative ideas for some alternate things that could happen in a bigger gym. It won't work if the gym stays at 6,000 square feet. So there's some conditional piece to this. And the OT room, we can probably do some multi-purposing for some PT. The nature of those, we think we can figure it out. So we're coming this morning willing to say that space could be reduced. Kristen, how much is that?
2,600 net.
For all PE, or is that
2,000 both?
So let me keep going then. So that's one. We also looked at the maker space. Again, sort of this hard swallow to do it. And Justin's going to turn his camera off in a minute because this was so hard. We might be able to push that in the library or come up with something else. We don't want to lose the idea of it because we already have these ad hoc maker spaces that we value greatly. But if we get creative down the road as we get into schematic design, we're willing to give that up and see what we can come up with. So the two together, Kristen, then is what?
The 2,600 net.
2,600 square feet we're offering. That's such an odd word to use, but in the ed plan, that's what we've come up with for ideas, which equates to how much cost?
So applying the grossing factor, you're at 3,900 gross square feet using our 555 target square foot that we've been using for all of these increases and decreases, plus the project cost multiplier. We're thinking that may be around 2,700,000. So
we're still going to meet the ed plan. This isn't the way we thought we were going to do it, and that's okay. I hope that helps us get to where we need to be, and we'll work through what we did there.
Thank you, Lori. I think in the spirit of collaboration and tough decisions, that's definitely could be, a path forward as far as compromise, right? So I appreciate you guys going back and looking at that. And I still see Justin, so.
Yeah, he's gonna want to talk.
I know how valuable maker spaces are to schools. So I hope that can somehow still survive within the space that we've got, otherwise. So I just want to be clear. So the alternate PE is 1,600 net square feet.
Correct.
The maker space was 1,000 square feet net. So you're saying together they're 2,600. You're applying the grossing 1.5 factor. And again, grossing's walls, increase of corridors and et cetera. That's applied to all net spaces in a building. And then you put the numbers on top of it. So thank you, Lori and team, Justin, Kristen. I know you guys met maybe a couple times. I don't know, but thank you for working through some of those. And I know those were spaces that definitely there were a lot of discussion at the design subcommittee level about those back in, maybe that was late February or March, where we talked about those spaces at length. But appreciate the willingness to compromise for the sake of, again, Linda, your quote's gonna last today, but to try and move us toward a yes.
And I just want to qualify, just as Lori indicated, although we call it alt PE, it does include the occupational, the physical therapy piece.
Yeah.
So that needs to somehow still survive because that's a service that's integral to students.
Right.
Yeah, so the vision of what those spaces we're going to do needs to outlast the space discussion. Right.
And there was always an occupational therapy space, if my memory serves, that will somehow try to collaborate within that space for physical therapy and or move to the larger gym space when needed to do more, I suppose.
That's the thought for now. It's going to take more work, obviously, to get it all tidied up. But
well, it's good to clarify and to reiterate that nobody's eliminating functions. We're going to continue to provide those functions, but we're going to figure out another way to do it.
That's the goal.
I think that is the point, and nobody should think that we're going to drop these various requirements and capabilities. Have to move things around.
Yep.
By the way, if you just look at those numbers that were put forth by Lori, and you were to look at a skinny version of the enhanced auditorium and gym, you're very close. Now, if you want to go a lot larger than that, you start creating a gap, and that I think is the trade-off discussion that we need to have around these community spaces, or so-called community spaces. The larger we make them, the deeper you have to dig into existing space if you're going to come out at 100 million. I don't think anybody really wants to dig too far into the existing space summary. So that's the tension here, I think.
Yeah, digging farther than that's going to be a different discussion, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
People talk from there.
I'm gonna just talk. I'm very anxious to hear from Justin and Heather and Chris and other members of the committee. But I would just ask Lori, and this is a big ask. I think it's going to be really important for the community to understand how we can continue to provide these functions without these spaces. We have a model for a middle school that is very inclusive and really respects the diverse kinds of needs that kids come to middle school with, and kids with disabilities. And I know there's a big community out there that cares a lot about that, and we should care a lot about that. So more than anything, I want to get to a yes on this project, and I want to get to schematic design. And I don't want to hold up the process, but I would just recommend that we, as quickly as humanly possible, given everything else everybody has to do, we have a plan that people can understand for how we will continue to deliver those functions. Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you. Justin, I see your virtual hand up.
Yes, thank you. So, and I'm grateful that for what Charlie and Pat said. I raised my hand before they both spoke. And, certainly in the conversations of going back to the ed plan, I've lost count how many times we have gone back to the ed plan. I also want to remind, my colleagues on this committee that this is a faculty and a staff and a program of study that's coming from 2 buildings into 1. and the ed plan is now being, I don't want to use the word compromised because I think that's too strong of a word, because I agree with Charlie, and I'm going to go to what Charlie said in just a couple minutes, but my art teachers, my world language teachers, my special education teachers, now my PE teachers, they're all coming from 2 buildings with their own spaces, their own program, and we're being brought into one, what will be a marvelous, state-of-the-art, spectacular building. But this is a great dramatic shift for the faculty and staff of Concord Middle School, and the robust programs that we have in place. And I think very early we named that it's very hard to find comps, other middle schools, that has a music program that we have, that has a world language program that we have, that considers world language part of the core academic offerings of our program and study. It's hard to find that, even in this part of the country. You can find some private schools. I'm tasked, like all of you, to be fiscally responsible. I have family throughout the town of Concord who is getting the paper edition of the Concord Journal, which tells you what demographic they are, and are sharing with me their concerns about the price of this project. So I'm a committee member who has taken on the charge to be fiscally responsible. And I am in support of us looking at the makerspace. I'm in support of us looking at the alt PE. I just want to spend another 60 seconds or so, because if we ever get to a place, where maybe the cost of the materials or whatever goes down, there may be people who aren't in education that hears that the makerspace may not no longer be part of the schematic design on the blueprint, and great, I don't know what a makerspace was, was really supposed to do anyways. There are hospitals and public library projects that have makerspaces in them. When we're doing a tour of the building, when other communities and districts, come to us for a site visit to look at, truly what a 21st century school looks like, they're going to ask where our makerspace is. Because again, that's how public libraries are being built. That's how hospitals are being built, children's hospitals in particular. Charlie's right. Education and teachers in particular, we adapt very, very quickly. And regardless if there is not a makerspace on a blueprint, there will be a makerspace as we open up the new Concord Middle School. I'm not too concerned about that. I would like to emphasize what Pat said, though, in terms of, the students who need spaces like the makerspace, which tends to be a population, of students that are drawn to things like Lego robotics and things like that. That's when they find who they are and their identity in middle school. It's so powerful. And then the alt PE space is same. So we're going to adapt. I believe this is the right move to be fiscally responsible. But I needed an opportunity to just share the voices of the teachers, the faculty and staff, and the impact that this is going to have. And if there's anyone, and I don't believe anyone sits on this committee, that's like, great, wonderful. I didn't even know why we had that space to begin with. If there's an opportunity to go back and bring those spaces in, I'm going to be the first one who speaks. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate your perspective and your voice for others who aren't on the committee who service these spaces and the students in Concord. So very much appreciate that and agree with you. I have not designed a school in the last 5 years without a makerspace. To be honest with you, it's in the MSBA space template as a space. And same with alternative PE, frankly. So just for perspective, you're absolutely right on, 21st century schools and spaces that are inherent to that So I'm happy to hear that those services will still be provided, maybe just within the, other spaces that we currently have in the space template. So thank you. I think I saw Chris. Did you have your hand up?
Dawn, Heather's been waiting a long time.
And Heather, okay.
And Chris, both of them.
Heather and Chris, excellent, thank you.
Thank you. What I was going to say keeps changing over the past 15 minutes. I guess I will start high level with the fact that I'm assuming that Lori and Justin have already had a few days to process this before being able to say in public that they're okay with it. And I haven't, and this is shocking to me, to be honest. I completely 100% appreciate that they have gone back and looked at what they can offer up to this committee. So Lori and Justin, I really applaud you for doing that and for bringing us, what's the option to bring the number down in some way. So I guess I'm speaking to the rest of the committee and saying, please, let's be careful. I think when Justin says a 21st century school has a makerspace, that is true. I mean, and Dawn, that we've been saying since the beginning of this that we want to create a 21st century school for this town. And I think we're starting to shave away at that. We've said that we are going to be 100% committed to the educational plan. And despite the fact that the goal is still to create the functionality without the space, that's going to be a shaved down version of functionality. Let's be honest, unless we can get it back somehow. And it sounds like at this point we can't count on doing that. To me, this is a little concerning, and I'll go back to the overall, the feedback that we've received from the FinCon and the select board. I appreciate that and I respect it. And as everybody said, we really do need to take into account the community feedback. So those are two pieces of it. And I understand and agree with the need to keep our number as low as we possibly can and still address the goals that we are all here to address. I think when we look at that community feedback, there's feedback from the select board, there's feedback from the finance committee, and there are feedback from a lot of other people in the community. Those are two boards who represent the community, and we've also heard directly from community members with different views. In many ways, if you look at the overall feedback, there's select board and finance committee and some community members, asking us to bring it down to 100. There are a lot of community members asking us to get this building right so that we don't end up in a situation like Peter talked about with the master plan. I think we have to be careful not to weigh some feedback over others. I would point out in the survey that we had overwhelming feedback asking us to do this right and include what's needed. And I know that many people have dismissed that as just parents, but I do want to point out that a majority of the parents who filled out that survey will not have kids who go through the schools. So if you look at the survey that way, if we broke it out by only parents of young kids versus the rest, the majority of the survey was actually parents who will not have their kids benefit from this school. And I think that's important to point out, that a lot of that feedback was from taxpayers who will not directly benefit from the school. And so I do get concerned if we start cutting this back too much, that it could fail at town meeting. When we talk about getting to yes, the compromises are important. They absolutely are. And I just don't want to compromise so far that we go to the other side and we end up losing this building because it's not enough. And so the educational pieces concern me. Pat brought up that our special ed dedication. We are a district who is very focused and dedicated to special education. And I know it sounds like you can find space for OT and PT somewhere else, but I don't want to be squeezing them into a space and end up feeling like special education got, squeezed into a corner here. And I know Lori and Justin would not do that, but I don't want them to be forced into a corner by the rest of us. The makerspace, like, again, I've said that it's 21st century. So I guess I won't keep going on too much, but I need to express that I think we need to be careful here before cutting back too much. I feel like we are cutting into ed plan functionality that we all said we wouldn't do. And so the last piece, back to the 100 million, I want to bring this number now down. I certainly do not want to come in at 108 or even close to it. Let's make that very clear. I want to be close to 100 million. But I also think we need to be careful of picking an arbitrary number. And I am calling it arbitrary because all of our calculations before, even if you debate the 108, led up to at least 105. And 100 is a big number, and so it's a sticker shock. I get that. But for us to be short-sighted and cut into our building for an arbitrary number of 100, I don't think is a good idea. And in terms of that tax impact, this is a big tax impact, and we need to address that. And I feel like we need to do some work on tax relief for those who need the help, because $1,000 a year is a huge impact, even if it's 900 or less, depending on your property value. But the impact is the 900 to 1,000. That's where people need help. The incremental 45 for an incremental 3 or 5 million is not the difference maker, but it can make a difference in building this building right. So I will leave it at that. And my 2 questions that I would love feedback at some point on would be, please help us understand how we would address this functionality, because the current maker spaces squeezed into office spaces those aren't really maker spaces. And also, what's the likelihood of getting any of this back in schematic design? So sorry to be so long-winded, but thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And I'll just share where I was Monday night because it relates to this. After the select board meeting, I said, well, let's just go back to the ed plan building because we all agreed, right? But that doesn't address the community issue. So I'm all over the map as far as thinking since, the FinCom and select board feedback. So, but I completely agree that, we need to understand this better. And I think we'll ask Justin and Lori to think about that a little bit more, how this actually can, I don't think they'll have an answer today or tomorrow, but how this we can still provide those services within the space of the building if we were to, cut out that net square feet that we just talked about. So thank you for reminding us about that, Heather. Chris Popoff, I see your hand, Chris.
Thanks to Lori and Justin for taking a closer look at those aspects of the project. What I'm wondering now, to help all of us on the committee and those of us listening and watching on the meeting, if we get further into those details, it might be helpful to have our concept overview up on the screen. And if we're going to talk further about those details, kind of highlight where they take place in the concept we've all agreed on right now so far. And maybe we're already getting into agenda item 5. But I think that would be very, very helpful because although we tend to know what we're talking about, when you throw out 1,600 square feet, all PE and 1,000 at the makerspace, I imagine others may say, okay, where is that exactly in the building? Also, Lori threw out 6,000 square foot gym. Well, I may have missed something in all this.
No, I was going to correct
probably
her
is
too.
we've moved beyond
7.
6,000 square foot gym.
Yeah,
And we
you're
have
right.
a larger auditorium. So once again, I think the pictures would be very helpful if we're going to get into that more today. The other question is how much we're going to decide today when we get to that, or are we also going to be putting more and more of these details on how to adjust this plan to meet a budget, and it's all going to happen on schematic design. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Those are important points. And thank you for pointing out the 6,000. When Lori said it,
Yes,
I thought
thank you,
I should
Chris.
correct her on that's because we've agreed to date that it's 7.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And I see Kristen scrambling. She may be looking to put up some visuals for us on the overall concept floor plans that have been proposed to date. And that's a good suggestion. So thank you, Chris. and just so everyone knows, we have sort of blurred into item 5 from the select board update into the schematic design. This really, they somewhat go hand in hand. That was feedback that we received in an update on the meeting. This is really discussion around how we make decisions to move us into schematic design. And Lori had offered and been requested to revisit some of the spaces last week. And she said she'd do that. So that was her update related to spaces. At the end of the day, we need to provide SMMA and Hill a direction to move into schematic design. The goal, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, was to do that starting next week, has always been our schedule to keep us moving forward in this process. Basically, that feasibility comes to an end. We agree on general space sizes that they then move a design into schematic design for the next few months. And from that, there will be small studies of spaces and how they lay out and adjacencies and details of spaces that will, you know, come to fruition in schematic design that will either create more questions or create answers, right? Like, this isn't like we make a decision today and it's done. Schematic design is an evolution of the drawings. I mean, what you're looking at is like a colored floor plan that allocates space and general adjacencies and layout. But for those that don't do this for a living, may not know that the next level is to actually like start to figure out, you know, is that the right proportion of the room? Does, you know, something need to change? Does it need an exterior window? You know, these are decisions that get made in schematic design. These drawings are really close actually, because they've done a lot of work in feasibility. So we're not far from there, but to just answer some of Chris's question about, you know, moving into schematic design and what gets decided then, that's what we're hoping to move towards. So thank you for bringing this up, Kristen. Can you point out where the makerspace is? This is only the ground floor. Is it on the?
Yep, everything's right here on the ground floor. So the maker is here attached to the media. Those are two spaces that are typically symbiotic and how they operate now and in many schools that we work with. And then the alt PE, well, so on both plans, it's this. And then alt PE on the 7,000 square foot gym plan is here attached again to have that relationship. And in this, where we were looking at the two MIAA cross courts, which I don't think we're looking at anymore, but it just shows a larger gym and how that might shift to have the alt PE more central.
Right, and the space next to the makerspace, not the purple, but the light blue is the cafeteria and servery and kitchen as you kind of move plan left.
Yeah.
And then the auditorium is above. Yep, and I think those are probably music rooms.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, but I've seen a floor plan or two in my time.
Yeah.
Yep, so those are kind of the open beyond the general hours part of the building, right? Like those could be used at night, and the classrooms are more private and get locked off from a security standpoint to the right. So if it wasn't clear where those were, those are the spaces we're talking about today. Thank you, Kristen. I see Dean Banfield has his hand up. I will call on you to.
I do, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for, I am just a member of the public, although I'm the Finance Committee liaison, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I just wanted to make a minor comment on something that Heather said. Heather represented the survey as showing overwhelming support for, you know, a larger budget. The overall survey, even unadjusted, showed 56% in favor of a larger budget. That is not an overwhelming number. And when, you know, any minor adjustment is made to that number for the fact that the survey itself is not that representative of the community, I think to characterize this as overwhelming support for going to a larger number is really a misrepresentation of what that survey showed. So that's just my comment for now, and I'll stand down.
That's fair, Dean. Sorry about that. I guess I got wrapped up, but that's a fair comment. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Dean. Any other, I don't see any virtual hands up. Hi, Frank. I see your physical hand up. Please. You're muted, Frank.
No,
Frank,
Frank, you're on mute. You want to turn on your microphone. Perhaps on the lower left of your screen. Lower left, it might say mute and unmute.
You want it to not have a red line through it, Frank. It wants to be just a gray microphone. Maybe you don't see it. Do you know how to write in the chat? Oh, we don't have a chat function, huh?
I think the host can unmute him.
I can send him a message. I don't. See if that helps.
Maybe
Laura, you don't have the capacity to unmute.
All I can do is it sends a little message to do it, but it doesn't actually undo it.
I think
he's calling in reinforcement, so we'll give him a moment.
And that was why I had my hand raised, simply because I had noted that Frank had his raised. I'm sure he was recognized. Thank you.
Yep, I appreciate that, Court. I see Matt Johnson has his hand, so let's call on Matt while Frank's trying to figure the unmute out.
Thanks. I wanted to acknowledge that, yes, it does sound pretty tough, when Lori and Justin talk about the kinds of changes that they'll need to make over on the academic side. I just want to acknowledge that these are the kinds of hard choices I think that we need to look at. Now, whether they're the specific ones, I defer to the school administration. On the other hand, though, I'm curious whether there's kind of another turn of the crank, if you will, on the gym and the auditorium side of things. I feel like I'm playing with half a deck of cards here, where there's been some movement perhaps over on the academic side. Is there also a way that, I think Charlie used the term sharpen the pencil, over on the auditorium and the gym,
If I could do anything.
once again gets close to that, closer to that $100 million number.
Yes, I agree, Matt. We should move into that piece of the discussion, because that's, as you said, the other half of the deck, or the other piece of this puzzle.
We're arguing over something where the answer is already available. Maybe we're already at a consensus answer. We just don't know it yet.
Right. I'm hopeful we can get there today. So let me see what Frank's comment is. I don't know, Matt, you took your hand down. I thought I saw Matt Root's hand up, but let's get through that, and then let's open the conversation to the gym and auditorium scope and size as well. So Frank, I see you were able to unmute.
Okay, thank you. What I was going to bring up was the gym and the other space. Okay, we don't have, at the 15%, we can't do both of what they want to do, and we don't have sufficient parking if we make a bigger auditorium. Okay, we're not going to go with this and not have any parking for that to be at night. And I think we ought to look into this some more. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Stephen Crane, your hand is up.
Yeah, hi, Donna. I just wanted to comment very briefly that, I think when I, at the board meeting Monday night, when the discussion was had, and then upon reading the letter from Linda, you kind of mentioned this in passing. But my first thought was, well, okay, we have a reference point from when the design subcommittee did their report out of a building that met the ed plan that we estimated to be on the $100 million mark, that the committee, I think, broadly supported. And of course, you were the chair of the design subcommittee. Seems like a lot of thought went into that work. I was not a part of that, but I could see the level of effort and the hours that went into developing that plan. And the only reason, by my recollection, that plan was that we took an effort to relook at what was the budget based on the original discussion in 2019. What are and then the feedback from the community and the survey and a lot of other inputs. That was prompted in large part by the community feedback. That's why we said, okay, we have this plan that works, but now we're hearing from people that there are certain spaces that should be looked at again to meet certain community needs. And that's how we kind of got through this process and got additional feedback from the Finance Committee and Select Board, which is all to say that I think a year and a half ago when we started, I think some of us who have experienced this knew that we were going to hit a point where there was going to be competition amongst certain spaces and facets of the building as the process unfolds. That's pretty typical. And you're right, Dawn, and that Linda's comment about getting to yes, I think is really the theme of the meeting and the theme of the process where we are now. And so I guess what I really want to say is all of this is a success. Getting to here, as painful as it feels with compromising further on the ed plan, which did already feature a lot of compromises through the design subcommittee process, and now really looking to the community members who made their voices heard to also compromise on the gym and the auditorium spaces that they want. And then further, call upon those who are deeply concerned about the cost that there may need to be some compromise there a little bit as well. Congratulations. I mean, congratulations, Concord, that this is all really a successful process to get to this point. And I think there is a pathway to yes that I think we'll be able to figure out going forward. And so my hope is that we recognize as a committee that we got to this tough place that I think everybody knew was going to happen. And we're working our way through it. So I just want to, say that because I'm sitting here, thinking, geez, it sounds really kind of, painful, but in many ways it was necessary. And again, I think an achievement.
Thanks for that reminder, Stephen. You're absolutely right. And for those who haven't been through a building design process, this is normal. No building design process is ever easy. So there are tough decisions to make along the way and compromises, of course, with everything in life. We have to find a way to collectively move things forward. So appreciate your comments, Stephen, and the reminder. Did anyone else have their hand up, or did anyone want to?
Matt, can I nudge you to, you had your hand up before and would love to hear from you. And I know you're missing bike to school day today, so would really like to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I guess, Stephen, thank you for the pep talk. It still doesn't feel great, but thank you for the confidence boost there. I mean, I guess I have a number of thoughts, and most of them are actually just focused on process right now and how we move forward. I mean, I will say the finance committee's meeting from a couple weeks ago, I really appreciated how they went around and made everyone kind of say something and say where they were at, because I think that at least as an observer, that helped me understand not knowing any of those individuals, kind of where their thinking was, and I think it was helpful to show the variety of thought. And so, and I'm sure kind of all of us are feeling a little bit the way some of the points have been represented. I mean, I think Heather did a great job of articulating my angst over the issue. Just to dive into my thinking, I do feel like we heard strongly from the select board and the finance committee that 100 million should be our cap, and that we really should drive towards that. And then I really appreciate Justin and Lori, you're looking at it and putting forward an option, and now we knew there was going to be a cut somewhere, and so I guess we knew we weren't going to like it, but now we can look at it and I don't know. I mean, so the trade-off is those spaces versus the bigger auditorium and the bigger gym, and I right now I don't know where I am on that, because for the reasons mentioned by others. So I guess that's why I'm turning to the process and how we work through this. I mean, there was mention of trying to get to a vote today. I guess I'm curious what we're trying to vote on. And also back to maybe Matt's point, yeah, I guess I'm a little still unclear in terms of, okay, so we have Lori and Justin have identified the 2 spaces that could be cut. But back to the gym and the auditorium, I mean, what are we really looking for to define there? I mean, prior to last week's meeting, I thought the auditorium was 350 seats, but then Justin informed us that there were 100 kind of temporary seats. So does that mean that we're more looking for 450 to kind of meet what is in place right now? So are we looking at 450 square feet auditorium, or sorry, 450 seat auditorium, and then what are the basketball limits? I know Charlie was talking about squeezing that space a little bit. So I guess I feel like I still need to understand what those auditorium and spaces now that we would be considering. Sorry for my rambling, but
No, that's okay, Matt.
Matt, that wasn't rambling. That was fine.
That's good. So I have 2 suggestions. One is to your process point. I mean, are folks comfortable sharing what they're currently thinking, and hold that thought for a second. The other thing is Kristen can share some scenarios, alternatives of combinations, and what the cost implication to them may be, if that's helpful to move this discussion into, okay, so if there's compromise on the learning side of things, is there compromise on the increase to the gym and auditorium? Court, I see your hand. What are you thinking?
I want to be patient. I don't want to push this along too quickly, but I will share with you my current thinking. First, to echo, I think what Stephen and others have said, I too want to look at our process not through the lens of what we might be losing from our hopes, but rather what we're gaining here. I think we're still in the gain column all the way along in many respects. I am a proponent of Alt PE if we can pull it off, but it looks difficult right now, and we do have alternatives for that. So I just want that noted. I'd love to see that restored someday, now or in the future if we could, but we have other needs to meet here also, and that's been presented as one of 2 accommodations to the instructional space. At the risk of upsetting the process or timetable, I'll echo what I've said before, and that is, I don't know if non-instructional space bears any further consideration. That's a good chunk of our building that we haven't examined in terms of what we could put in play, if anything. So I don't want to drag us there if we shouldn't be there. I just want to note we haven't really gone there. And that's not a small percentage of the overall 143,000. So I don't know what the building design experts would tell us about potentials there. And then finally, what I do see is, were we to achieve a 3,900 square foot gross savings with the accommodations Dr. Hunter has suggested we could discuss, that does, I think, allow us to make some accommodations in the current gym and auditorium that might be reasonable upsizing, although not achieve everybody's or the proponents' hopes for, let us say, 10 or 13,000 gym, 500 auditorium. I don't think we're going to get there, but I think we can bring it above the current 7,000. I think we can bring it above the current 270 with the accommodations that Mr. Cameron and Dr. Hunter have presented to us today. Laurie?
Yeah, and through Dawn, just a little feedback on that. I agree with Court. There's probably other spaces to look at. We were running on quick turnarounds here, obviously. So we touched base on a couple and then just couldn't get confident enough to go there. That might be work we can do into schematic and see if there's other ways to eke out a bit. You know, for example, we looked at custodial space, and so we touched on it. We didn't have a chance to do it thoroughly. So you're right about that. So just wanted to note that it came up at least.
Right.
I would just, in response to that, I'm hoping that we don't get bogged down in wanting to keep looking at space and looking at space. That I want to trust that Lori and Justin and the educators and the architects and designers will keep looking at things. When we talk about we haven't looked at it, well, no, I haven't looked at it, but I don't think I'm the one who should be looking at it. I think that I'm going to trust, this is my feeling now, I'm going to trust that Lori and her team will keep looking at it. I guess I'm feeling like it's time now to look at, so what are some of the possibilities with the gym and the auditorium space? What does it look like now that we're skimming away at the, I'm not even going to call it the makerspace and the alt PE. I'm just going to call it the 2,600 or whatever it is square feet that we could possibly skim off of the project at this point, and then leave it up to the educators to come back with a plan. And I'm assuming they're not going to take out classrooms. So,
Pat, if I may, I just want to respond. I'm not asking for every detail that was considered. I want to be clear. What I was trying to convey was I simply want assurances that aspects of this building that we have not looked at in this committee were looked at somewhere. And I think Laura, you heard that. I think
yeah, we agree.
I just want that confidence. That's all I'm looking for.
Yeah, and we agree, of course. You know, we're going to dig for any other space to get some of this back. That I assure you we will. We didn't have time in the last week to do that, or even, I'll be honest, this is a conversation since Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
The select board meeting mattered a lot to me. So, yeah.
If I may, and I know I speak for my colleague on the school committee, Heather, we are very gratified that you made the time, and at this time of year, in this year, to make time, extra time for this, Lori and Justin, was not a small task on your part. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's get to yes and build a school.
Right. I want to echo that, just recognizing all that's going on and Lori's valuable time, and, you know, finding time to meet with Justin and the designer to you know, look at these tough decisions is critical. So thank you from Pat and I and the rest of the committee for doing that. Do we want Kristen to walk us through a couple scenarios? And then, I mean, I'm comfortable sharing where I am, to Matt's point about kind of, you know, folks kind of playing their cards or saying where they are. And I said a little bit where I felt, I went to bed Monday night, like, that's it, ed plan building, let's move forward. But then I woke up on Tuesday recognizing there's a community out there that's giving us feedback, and that's valuable. So, you know, how do we work in the spirit of compromise to find something that, you know, can move us forward? So
I think it would be helpful to hear more from Kristen, and then
agreed. I was just really giving her time to pull up some slides.
So we'll breeze through the familiar pieces again, where we had started with CCYB, where we landed updated with CCYB a few weeks ago. And then again, we received that email because there was a lot of curiosity about the run out space and the sidelines. And so that's the major difference between this 10,620 net and the 10,528 net, is that we've updated this run out to and sidelines to reflect the most updated information from CCYB, which we understand is the community representation of the gym use. And that is still the cross courts that are 74 by 46. And we heard Mark speak last meeting about the fact that that is driven by that 3-point line. So then we added from the last meeting, Charlie had mentioned that he was interested in seeing the 74 by 42. And again, that delta, the 46 to 42 is that 3-point line piece. What we, and Charlie provided us some information on his feelings on divider to curtain and run out and so on. So just to qualify for keeping, 2 reasons that we did some modifications to this is, one, the going to this 3-foot divider to curtain dimension in lieu of the 5-foot, it actually doesn't work for the main court. So the main court is 84 foot. That's the MIAA court is 84 foot long. And then MIAA has 10-foot run out for MIAA courts. So when you do 10 plus 84 plus 10, you're at 104. And if you were to do the these cross courts side by side and add them all up with the 3 feet, you're shy of that. So it actually wouldn't work for the MIAA court. So we left this at 5 for the divider to curtain and the sidelines piece. And then the run out beyond the goals, again, for MIAA, it's noted as the 10. And then for based on feedback of the 74 by 42 or 46 courts being a playing court, not just strictly practice, but a real true playing court, the feedback is to do 8 foot of run out at the ends of those as opposed to the 6. So, so that's just a slight difference in the overall, which is why our net square feet is 9,776 when you do a 74 by 42 as opposed to this 1,000 square foot smaller. And it's really a lot to do with that 104. And I also believe in these calculations, it didn't account for the space required for the 4-foot stacked closed bleachers. So we have to add that into the dimensions as well. So those were the 2 major nuances, is keeping that at 104, I guess it's 3, keeping that at 104, keeping this at 8, and then making sure there's room for the bleachers. So again, down from 10,528. So it's but still not quite as far as where Charlie had worked with his direction here.
So can I just ask you, Kristen, with those changes, what is the net square feet with the adjustments you just spoke about?
9,776.
So that's with all of the adjustments that you just spoke.
Correct. Yeah. And here's the one where if if we were to be able to go to 102 and if we were able to drop some of these, that would be there. But again, the one dimension, the 104 is non-compromising. The run out beyond the goals is 6 versus 8. I did, when I received this, it's a delta of 400 square feet. Net.
Okay.
You know, so it's not substantial there if you change that.
Hey, Chris.
So that's 1,000 square feet. And, you know, if you play by the rules of what we add to the gym comes out of the ed program, that is equivalent to the one of those 2 spaces that were quoted by Lori. So just, you got to think about it in those terms. And I wonder, I think we ought to give more airtime to the trade-offs between what was presented as a 8,800 square foot arrangement versus this 9,776. In other words, what are we losing? And this is a conversation that we need to have. I'm not convinced that yet. I mean, I could be, but I'm not convinced yet that we need 9,776 based on these comments. So for what it's worth.
Where would you,
This needs more work and more discussion.
So would, Dawn, Pat, if I may? Kristen,
yeah, and
Kristen, a 9776 net means upsizing from the current 7,000 to the tune of, am I correct, a little over 4,000 gross square feet?
Yeah, I'd have to calculate that out. I mean,
I get it as a net 2776 increase from present, 4164 gross increase from present, which when we look in terms of trade-offs, gobbles up the accommodations that Justin and Lori brought our way today. I know I'm being overly simplistic here, but I'm just looking at
that could,
pieces.
yeah, that's approximate that way, if just looking at the gym.
All right, and I'm not saying that's the way to understand it, just one way.
And you know, one other comment on this: the 9776 is about 1,200 square feet bigger than the previous SMMA recommendation for option 1, which was 8,600. So, you know, a lot of ways to look at this, and you know, this is certainly one of them. But again, with sharpening pencils and looking at trade-offs in terms of what you lose if you go with this smaller configuration versus what you gain on the ed plan side, that's the discussion we need to have.
So again, that 8,600 that's referenced frequently was in the 2019 study that was without any community input or the interface on what the cross court should be. So that was in a vacuum. That was just cross courts that are with it, you know, somewhere between 2 MIAA and the 7,000 or the 6,000 MSBA type gym. So that was not derived from any input.
Well,
so
no,
I don't want to.
I know that. I know that, and I also know that SMMA has done this before. So I'm sure you didn't make that up out of whole cloth. That you've done this before, and that there was some rationale behind that 8,600 rather than pulling, you know, something out of the air. So you know, I think there's more to this conversation than we're having.
Sounds good.
A way to explain this to the layperson who doesn't know anything about basketball, that what do we lose if we go to, what was option 3, Kristen? Oh, that's okay. And then option 2. Okay. So if we go to, what do we lose if we go lower than 9,776 square feet?
So if anything below this updated CCYB one is really driven by the 3-point line piece, you know, which I think, Charlie, you have it here. Yeah.
Yes.
This distance in corner to 3-point line. So that's when someone, and I'm not a basketball player either, but when someone's taking a shot from that 3-point line, they only have 1 foot 3 inches to stand within and make that shot before they're out of bounds. So you know, just from a proportion, it makes any scoring from a 3-point line or any true playing from a 3-point line not really likely.
And so that's 1,000 square feet difference?
No, that's part of, that's one part of the 1,000. Okay. The other part is, I believe, the 4-foot bleachers, Charlie. When I did my gym sizing, I just couldn't get to this 86 by 102 and landed at the 90. And I think it's because of that 4 foot for bleachers.
Do you need to have 4 feet for bleachers, or could you have a smaller set of bleachers? Why do we need that number of bleachers?
That is a fully collapsed set of bleachers sized for accommodating the all school assembly, and it's sized for 500 to be seated and the rest to be on the floor. So again, with the school not having an all school assembly space, we were putting bleachers in there in a balance to loose chairs in order to accommodate the all school assembly use.
So I don't want to, again, sound argumentative, and I hope I don't. But when we had the 7,000 square foot gym, did we have 500 in the bleachers? We had 5. We had accommodation for 500 with 7,000?
I believe so. I'd have to ask Phil because I haven't looked back at that one in a while. But we've always been assuming it may have been less bleachers, more loose chairs or something. And Phil, I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, that's correct. The 7,000 would accommodate some degree of bleachers, probably in the 400 range, and the remainder on the floor. But in a 7,000 square foot gym, you could accommodate an all school assembly.
Yeah, so maybe that 4 foot went to 3 foot, Charlie, is kind of the short answer, you know, because maybe we would have done a slightly shorter stack just in order to fit everything within the 7,000 net.
And then the original plan of 6,000 square feet, which was in the original ed plan, did not include much of
No
that at all.
spectators, correct. And MSBA doesn't, you know, they're not looking to provide spectator space.
So again, you know, if we want 9,776 and we want to do 100 million, you see the I think everybody can see the problem, you know, or the opportunity, if you want to look at it that way. If we can slim this down, you know, we have to make some trade-offs. I think there still are some trade-offs that can be made here and sort it out. And I think, quite frankly, every 500 net square feet counts a lot, because you're looking at other spaces that are 1,000 square feet or 1,600 square feet in the ed plan. So these trade-offs are fairly significant, even though they don't sound that way from a numbers point of view. So anyway, so for what it's worth.
And just Matt Rice, I didn't realize, is also with us. And since he's the one who actually puts these bleachers into buildings, he did confirm that 4 foot is the stacked dimension for any, you know, any size. They just pull out fewer or so. So, okay, so those are the nuances to.
Sorry, Kristen, I see a couple of hands from committee members. So if it's related to the gym, I'd like to,
sure.
Matt Johnson.
Yeah.
Matt. First Johnson, then Root. Sorry, Matt.
Okay. So I guess it was hard to tell just from Kristen's narrative and without pictures, but Kristen, you'd said something about that the size couldn't be further reduced width-wise because of the needs lengthwise of the MIAA single court. And so that struck me that then maybe that what's given up if you further reduce isn't so much the width of the courts, but it's the length of the cross courts, right? That it doesn't seem like you could further shrink the width of the, or it's not necessary to shrink the width of the cross courts, because the MIAA court is going to drive the total width that's available. And it seems like you could almost line those out at 43 feet width because you're going to have the space due to the space needed for the length of the MIAA court. That's what it seemed to me to be. So it's not really so much the 3-point line at the edge. It's really about the total length of those cross courts and whether they'll be sort of playable as full court basketball, or that they'll just feel like practice courts if you go below that. I'm just trying to understand what it is, you know, that we're really talking about here, especially given that constraint that you mentioned.
Exactly. So just this graphic isn't of that specific one, but it does show that the MIAA court typically fits within, when you go to larger cross courts, it's a combination of the 10 foot that goes from the back line here to there, and just the addition of all of those dimensions across. And so
Right.
104
So
is the minimum.
We're talking about right down to the 7,000 foot would be about really shrinking from top to bottom, you know, the length,
right,
rather than shrinking from left to right.
Correct.
Thank you.
So question on the run out and the need to stick with MIAA. What if you didn't stick with MIAA and you reduce the run out? This is a junior high school. This isn't you know, a high school interscholastic program that we're running here. I just want to ask that question. What is the problem with dropping some of the MIAA standards here? Is it some sort of safety issue, or is somebody not going to play there because we cut a couple feet off the end, or what exactly is the story here? You know, the Sanborn does not have this, and I'm not saying Sanborn was adequate, but they don't have this, you know, full MIAA treatment.
My understanding is that was the problem, because
well, we're
people
going to
want
get
to have a place for games, and if it's not an MIAA court, then actual games and tournaments can't be hosted there. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in front of hands. I just wasn't sure if anybody was answering the question.
so nobody's going to play on our court if we knock a couple feet off the ends to cut back on this run out.
Not for actual league games and tournaments.
League games, league of who?
Well, if I may interject.
Please.
Thank you, Justin.
Yep. So we are part of MIAA. Middle schools for the past 20 years have been a part of leagues. So this is not just town organizations. Concord Middle School is a part of traveling basketball leagues. And, you know, we have to comply. I do believe, and I might be misspeaking here, that because middle schools 30 years ago were not part of MIAA, you know, the older buildings were grandfathered in. With that said, I think the Sanborn basketball court is a regulation. Peabody is absolutely not. But we're talking about the middle school sports program. You know, really everything that we knew when we went to school in high school has filtered down in terms of sports, including, you know, other middle schools traveling in and playing us getting on buses, traveling to other middle schools. That's the reality of middle school in 2021.
Good answer.
So Matt Johnson, did that answer your question?
Well,
I'm just looking at the raised hand.
I mean, I think it was Charlie's question that was just answered, which is why can't the run out at the end of the full court, you know, be reduced? And yes, it is the case that if for some reason that could be reduced, you could then effectively get back to this, you know, 42 by 74 plan that would maybe go below the 9,700 that was done here. Because I think that at this point, really effectively with the 9776 or whatever it said, you're really ending up with the two cross courts being, you know, 43 or some other non-standard width, but that would be bigger than the 42 effectively, because you've got the space for it. Why wouldn't you draw them wider?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that's trying to be accommodated with that plan. And it would be great if somehow, like, you know, it needs somebody with the knowledge of the regulations that, like, okay, you've got the court, you know, MIAA compliant, but maybe if the runouts are 2 feet less, does that mean you can't hold a tournament there? You know, that, or I don't know. And if that, it does make a difference, because that is the one dimension that's driving that maximum size, the multiplier there.
Plus the, you know, is the 3-point space also affected? I mean, can we go back to 1.3 for the 3-point line? I guess that's based on the width of the court, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what Kristen was telling us we couldn't really effectively reduce because of the length of the MIAA run out.
Yeah, so the discussion really becomes here. So this needs to be 104, so that's adding the 2 feet there. But we have here 94 because that accommodates the bleachers and 8 feet of run out. So you could go to, and Charlie, you're working with 86. If you were to go instead of 8 foot run out for the cross courts, you could go to 6, then you'd be at 90. So there'd be something in the middle, and that's the 400 square feet that I was referring to. It's just slivers at this point, you know. So I think, you know, it may be prudent to move along and see everything holistically, and then we can always jump back, because I think there's always this combination and the total costs that we're looking at, rather than just.
Yep, I'm just going to say that I see hands, but to Kristen's point, let's get through the auditorium and then we can ask regarding questions about either, and she can flip back and forth through the slides.
And so I think this answers one of the committee members' questions earlier about the fact that we had early information that the auditorium sat 340, but then we understood that 420 is really its posted capacity. So we've updated our numbers to reflect the 420 status quo. That's now considered the status quo instead of the 350 because that would be under what is currently at Sandboard. And then we're still carrying the 467, which is that one that's informed by the MSBA standard for high schools. And also would address some of those other things like when one grade level has parents or something, if assuming each student has 2 parents attending an event or something, that would also fit in that 467, for example. So the committee has looked at no less than 9 combinations at this point. And so this is kind of combining them all on one screen. And, you know, we early on, you know, early on, we're looking at that 350. Early on, we're looking at the 2 MIAA. Taking those out of consideration, we're now at these 4 from our standpoint, where you're either looking at 467 or 420 in seats are the 2 auditorium seating numbers, and then the 74 by 46 or the 74 by 42. And again, this 74 by 42 is using that the SMMA adjusted court size for the accommodating those items we discussed. So looking at these, and these are the project costs, not the construction costs. These are project costs fully loaded. So your increase would be, for example, you would say you want your budget at 105.55 is kind of where this is anticipating if you were to go with this. Not quite, actually, here's the largest, 106.15 is your largest project cost factor here. And then from there, it just decreases depending on the mix that's selected. And the most lean is looking like it would be a 103.2. And that would be if, again, these lower end numbers are based on the net square foot and the higher end is based on gross square foot, because again, until we design it, we know we're not going to be at the gross square foot number in terms of the size increase for these adjustments, but we're also not going to be quite at that net. So it's going to lie somewhere in between here. And then I think, Court, going back to what your thoughts were, you know, the ed plan adjustment offset and the 3.9, the 3,900 gross square feet and the 2.7 million project cost on the table for the ed plan removal is kind of up against this. Not factored in because this is such fresh news. So that's the overview of everything and the auditorium options, and then again that rundown of costs. I did have the breakdown to show again our impervious area and exactly how we developed it. This is the 74 by 46 and the 2 auditorium versions. So, and then the second one is the 74 by 42 and the 2 auditorium size versions with all the detail. All of them are within the 15% impervious lot coverage limit. But yeah, it's just a factor of, you know, where this might land at 5 million in the end, this might be at 4.5, you know, those are kind of the considerations in these slides.
Great. So let's see. I see some hands. Justin, is yours still up from previously, or do you have a new question?
Sorry about that. I'll lower it.
No, that's okay. I wanted to give you the opportunity if there was something new. Peter Fashalis, I see your hand.
Yeah, Kristen, thank you. This is really helpful, and I appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into this. And it's good to see that we've taken one thing off the table, which is the exceeding the 15%. So it does seem like we're making progress. I'm looking at the differences in the gym and also I did not know that the MSBA recommendation was for that higher amount of seats in the auditorium, which was interesting.
That's a high school, right?
But yeah,
Kristen?
for a high school.
For a
Okay.
high school.
Thanks
Yep.
for clarifying
So,
that.
yeah, no,
Okay.
just to be clear. Yep.
Great. I think that I'm hearing us talk about the gym, and I'm really I understand the need, and I'm very leery about taking stuff from the education spaces. I don't like the fact that we're doing that, but in the same token, we heard from CCYB and we've heard from Justin. The MIA has certain rules, and if we're going to have games at the same time, we need the space to do that. And I don't want us to get to the point where we're cutting it down on a few hundred square feet here and there, and then not able to accomplish. Mark Caruso has put a lot of time, and I would ask the chairs, I think he has his hand up. I would like to hear from him on his comments, because I know they've put a lot of time into looking at the space sizing and the recommendations, and the option 3 that they've recommended seems to me to be the right way to go, and not continue to cut this down. But I'd like to hear from Mark if the chairs would recognize him.
I would. I don't see his hand up. I see his name in the participant list, but I do not see any hands.
I thought I saw his hand up.
Can I ask if we have a size gym that is optimal if we absolutely had to accommodate the alt gym space in the gym?
Oh, is that a question as to
So
what
if
is
we
the
have to-
optimal?
Yeah, so if we end up having to put the alt gym space in the gym because we've cut out the 2,600 square feet or whatever, what size gym do we need in order to accommodate that? Is that a point we can start from?
So it's, Lori will, help with this, but the educational teaching station need is only for 1/2 of this gym, right? So not all of the space is required for all the teaching stations. So you could use a section of one of the gym for some alt PE work. The problem is that alt PE space is really a very different looking space. Gym equipment, if put in, you'd have to put it in the sidelines, or it'd have to be moved in and out. Routinely, it would be there in the sidelines and have to be protected and things like that if you were wanting to accommodate gym equipment. Alt PE for OTPT, for the physical, for the PT piece it typically may have a swing or something like that, and that wouldn't be something that would typically be put into a gym space. So the alt P is a very different type of space and use, but we would look to try and blend it in with other spaces in the school and maybe on the sidelines for some equipment or something like that.
Thank you, Kristen. Matt Johnson, I see your hand, and Mark Caruso did put his hand up, so let me call on Matt, and then I will recognize Mark, since some of these recommendations were based on the CCYB information that was shared. So Matt Johnson.
Well, I was going to talk about the auditorium, and I thought we were moving on there, but it looks like we went back to the gym, so we might let Mark speak.
Okay, thank you, Matt. We're kind of seesawing back and forth, but it's all good conversation, so I appreciate your flexibility. Mark Caruso, do you want to turn on your camera and be recognized? Hello, good morning.
I would. Thank you, Don. Appreciate it. Mark Caruso, 76 Hawthorne Lane. I would actually like to ask Kristen to just review her math for me, just so I understand where the calculations came from. I want to understand if that 4 feet is in addition to the runoff spaces for the cross courts. or if it's included in the space, because I'm trying to reconcile my map that I have with what I just saw on the screen a few minutes ago. The way I look at it is that the length of the cross courts, right, that 74 feet corresponds to the width of the MIAA court. So the length of the cross courts overrules the width of the MIAA court. So that is what's driving a lot of the increase in the overall size. So if we look at 8-foot runouts on top of the 74 feet, that's 90 feet in length, right? And then for the width of the cross courts at 46 feet each, with 5-foot side runoffs and a 5-foot width between the curtains, that's 46 plus 46 plus 5 on either end plus 5 for the middle. And I think she used 6 for the middle. That adds up to 107 feet. So I'm trying to figure out, because I think the numbers are, at least from my calculations, look like they're smaller than she estimated. So I just wanted to make sure that the math was correct there, and I think she represented it well in terms of the length of the courts, right? If we're trying to get 2 middle school teams to practice at the same time and not have one of the teams be getting out of school and having these Metco kids go back into Boston at 6 o'clock at night, you really do need to have practice courts that can accommodate the 2 teams at one time. And that's the one thing I'll say is a lot of the thought process that has gone in here has been, how can we keep the functionality that we have today, right? And rather than reduce the size of the equivalent of the Sanborn gym, keep that size for the cross courts. Have the one MIAA regulation court for for games, and at least allow them to practice at the same time.
So in terms of the cross court run out, we are using 8 on the one end plus 74 for the length plus 8 plus 4, because if you were to absorb, otherwise your run out becomes 4.
Yeah,
right?
Got it. Thank you.
So that's on that one. And then I think our other discrepancy between what you were laying out and what we had is that we were understanding 5 foot to the curtain, which means you would have that on either side of the curtain. So that's 10 between.
Yeah, that's ideal.
Yeah.
And we
so
could shrink that if we needed to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And all of these things are typically, I do want to add, these things will be and can be sorted in schematic design, and we are talking about slivers here. I understand that there is a need and an interest in a lot of detail. It's really difficult to do without laying out the entirety of the building.
The architect in me had that same thought a few minutes ago, Kristen. So
what kind of curtain are we going to use?
Right. Agreed, but it is important, so it's valuable conversation to have.
I have a very bad MIA regulation volleyball building story, so you can get caught on any of these details, but we're not to that yet. Yes.
Yep. Good point. Okay, so Mark Caruso, we got to you. Matt, do you want to ask your question about the auditorium, unless anyone had any other gym? Let me just pose that real quick before I don't see any hands. All right.
Where do we stand on the 2 options then? What are we saying about the smaller cross court option proposal, the 9,700 one that you put up there? Are we saying that works? Are we saying it doesn't work? What are we saying about that? We have 2 options. We have Mark's, and we have the one that's slightly smaller. It's 1,000 square feet smaller. Does the smaller one work?
I'm gonna let Kristen speak to that, but if I heard her correctly, the slightly smaller by 1,000 square feet doesn't work with the runoffs and the bleachers and the, but correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen.
Well, I thought you corrected those problems to add that you added 1,000 feet to the 8,800 to correct those problems.
Yeah, no, it's the 3-point line is the driver on that conversation. So it's actually not, that would be actually, I would have to defer to CCYB because that extra distance for the 3-point line does increase us over 104. In the updated alternative where it's 42 for each of the courts, that gets us to 104, which matches in alignment with MIA for the 9,000. So if you want the distance for the 3-point line where kids aren't stepping out of bounds right away just to catch the ball, then it takes you to 112, I believe. So that does make you go beyond the MIA length.
So for the practice courts, if you will, there's the downside is the 3-point issue. If we give a little bit on the 3-point issue, we save 1,000 net square feet. Did I get that right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so that's one trade-off. We could say, well, a clear 3-point shot from the very corner of the court is worth 1,000 square feet. If that would be a decision that we would make under the scenario where we go to the larger configuration as recommended by Mark. If we want to save 1,000, we have a sacrifice of a little bit of flexibility in the corner. And I don't know how many shots they actually take from the corner, but that again, that's cost. We should be aware of that.
What I call a corner case.
That's a savings of over $500,000, right?
Yeah, and again, I really hate to say it, and maybe Mark has raised his hand to say this as well, but it may be that in this continued development that we can look at this 5-foot sideline, and go to 4 or something, and then this can drop a little bit, so I hate to say, I think it would be important to hear from the committee that, which direction we're going generally, and we're going to be working to refine and make this as efficient as possible in schematic design. Negotiating those 4 feet is at this time, I don't think the best approach.
No, I don't either. I just wanted to make sure that this was still alive and that we were, when we start moving towards trying to decide something, that we know which options are valid and which ones aren't.
When each dimension of the room is almost 100 feet or even above, each foot is a lot of square feet.
So, getting back to the 1,000 square feet, I don't know what the numbers really are, but that if you calculate it out, it's about $1 million. So that's the kind of numbers that we're playing with when we start shaving a little bit here and a little bit there. So anyway.
And I saw that Mark Caruso had his hand up but took it down, so I presume that is because Kristen answered the question. If that's different, please put your hand back up, Mark. Peter Fashalis, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I want to understand, do we need to make this selection now between these options, Kristen, or are you saying that you can proceed with, say, option 3 or option, I guess, under the letter scenario, under option F, and then we can continue to look at it, and then with the trade-offs? I'd like to understand if we have to actually say one of these or cut it down now, or whether we could proceed with the option, say the F, and then you can come back to us.
Kristen, I'm going to look for what you need to move into schematic design, because that's our ultimate goal. And I am recognizing it's 9:26 right now. So.
Yeah, I think that it would be most helpful to actually talk more about the auditorium for a minute and the seats, because we're looking for a range here, and it's really difficult because I'm not sure if the committee's goal is to hit a square foot target or a scope target or a budget target at this time. And so if the budget target is some number, then we need to be referring to these down here. If, we're down to very small deltas. And I guess I would actually be looking to the committee to understand, is it the goal to accommodate the CCYB use of the practice courts as playing courts, you know, with 3-point, and then we work on sidelines and so on for efficiency? Then that's one thing.
Maybe the clarity we could give you is to maximize the size of the cross courts based upon the width that is given by the MIAA length and a 74-foot length of the cross courts. And if you have those two constraints and you maximize the playing ability of those cross courts within those constraints, I think there's a potential answer, because you've heard that you might be able to take out some space in between the courts. You might be able to, and so we might end up with something bigger than 74 by 42 in the end, and a more playable 3-point line, but without adding unnecessarily to the length of that room.
Yep.
Yes, I agree, Matt. That
Great.
seems like
and that's perfectly fine. We can work with that.
Kristen, can we also come back to your comment about, are we working toward gross square feet, or are we working toward a budget, or what are we working toward? I think that's a very critical question. And I think that if we're going to control to 100 million, we really have to control to square feet. And if we're going to understand what we need to do on the other side of the coin, which is Lori's instructional space side of the coin, we need to understand, you know, with some sense of surety, what the size of the problem is. So we do really need to know whether we're talking, 9,000 or 10,000, 1,000 square feet in this scenario is fairly significant. So it's not small, and it's certainly not small when it comes down to questions on the instructional side. So I really think we ought to make sure that we're targeting the gross square feet of the building. And the budget numbers are interesting, but it's really the gross square feet that we're really should be focused on.
Yeah, so none of the current options will get you to 100 million. With the, you know, we have a rough calculation of 2.7 million is what the savings would be from no maker and no alt PE. So, and none of these, even on the low end, are at 2.7. So I think it's important, you know, is it possible to move forward with being slightly over 100 million? I believe the letter said to the extent possible, 100 million.
If we can move on to the auditorium and sort of take a look at what that might look like, and then see how close we are to 100 million. The decision is going to be up to I think our decision is, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we going to say, all right, we've gone as far as we can go and we're voting 103 million or 102 million or 100, whatever. That's what I think. Otherwise, we could be arguing square feet all day, or talking about the square feet all day.
And Pat, that's a great point, because I do think that once we know where you lie with the auditorium, we have a sense of where you are with the gym, and also Lori's position on the ed space. You know, I think that having that charge and moving forward, but with the understanding that it may be, you know, 103 or 104, you know, not necessarily revoting the budget, but voting the scope and saying we want the most efficient gym possible within these parameters, and we are comfortable with X seats, then we can work again toward the design phase refinements.
Matt Johnson, I assume your hand going back up is related to the auditorium, to move into that?
That was the idea. So
thank you.
I have to say that I'm really befuddled about the discussions around the number of seats in the auditorium, because we really have a combination of different metrics that have just shown up retrospectively, and anecdotal evidence from, you know, parents and everybody else that have been using these facilities. And I really think that a lot of the numbers that are thrown out here, are very arbitrary, and it's very difficult, I think, to justify the larger sizes. I mean, now, relative to 270, I think I do understand that that's tight, and yet I can't really objectively state how much that's too tight or something. I mean, for us to come up with, okay, well, here's the high school standard. Well, this isn't a high school, it's a middle school. If for us to go, well, there's the ed plan. Okay, well, that was the original ed plan, but then we heard last time, oh, well, but we do have these other assemblies and we have these seats that aren't permanent. I just feel really lost as to what is the legitimate need here. And I don't feel like, relative to our process in the other areas, that the process has been as rigorous to come up with a real number for number of seats here. I have to say that, when I look now that we've got the dotted lines around, only combinations that have over 400 seats, I don't see a reason why that has to be the case. And yet, I have to say, I just as much as anybody advocating for the large numbers don't have a clear basis, other than the ed plan, which is way down at 270, to state why they should be less.
Thank you, Matt. I think to shed some light on where these ended up, the 270 is clear. That's what they need for the ed plan. That's one grade population plus teachers, educators. The 350 was assumed until we heard from Justin recently about the portable chairs that were put in as because those are all the built-in seating, the permanent seating. The 350 was the status quo, right? Like what they currently have. And I think there was always a scenario that played out as a replacing kind, is what we call it in the industry. But, you give back what they currently have. And I think that 350 represents that. And I think the upgrade to the 420, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, recognized the portable or folding chairs, whatever the scenario is, that got the school to have, it was an assembly of some size, Justin, and I bear with me for not remembering exactly, but they do, and I think they were educational / assembly scenarios at the school at that 420 capacity. So Kristen updated these combinations to recognize the replacing kind, right? So the 420 capacity, even though all those seats aren't permanent necessarily. And then the 467 was just a scenario that played out that is the MSBA recommended for the high school, because they don't have a recommendation. They don't have a sizing for a middle school. And just there's so much looking back on what the MSBA sort of recognizes for space. That was a scenario, I believe, that Kristen and her team put together, saying, well, if we're going to do an auditorium, the only information out there is what the MSBA would otherwise allow at a high school level. So that's the 467. And then the 550, I think is that 2 classes plus educators? So that's where the 550 came from. So it's clear as mud, but I actually understand it because the 350 became 420 as a replacing kind. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Matt. I'm happy to have Kristen.
270 became 420 in the end. I just wondered, could we move to the, IA option, basically, that, as we were saying, the sharpened pencil as basketball courts, with that MAAA constraint. And then perhaps, the replace of Sanborn in kind auditorium of 350, which would, I guess, again, I really still don't have clarity. We talk about that one assembly that Justin talked about, but is that just very much like the corner case of the 3-point line? Is that really fundamental and worth spending, the extra 800,000 or whatever it is to get there?
Justin, I don't know if Is he still, sorry,
Yep.
I'm looking at Kristen's slide. Hey, Justin, I don't know if you want a chance to speak to that.
Sure, yeah, it's not one assembly, it's every assembly that we run that's a part of DESE's, anti-bullying curriculum, our advisory program, and school-wide messages that we like to share, and it's not unique to Concord Middle School. Many middle schools, high schools try to do school-wide assemblies. The school-wide would be done in the gymnasium, which is challenging. I come from a school where, as a principal, doing assemblies in the gymnasium. Often, though, the way that you can do assemblies at a middle school, especially in the beginning of the year, you kind of have those who you bring in, the speaker or anyone that's gonna, really connect with the students. Sometimes they code switch to a 6th grade, so I bring my entire 6th grade in, and then the 7th and 8th grade come in right after. I've been at schools that have a very robust, positive culture that will run assemblies sometimes once a month. We also have many extracurricular, including our musical, which is a huge part of our traditions that need that capacity in that auditorium space as well.
Yeah, I'm just confused because up until a few weeks ago, we had a 270 seat auditorium. And now I'm hearing it's not sufficient. We can't do it.
Could I just weigh in on that, Don, a little bit? It has evolved, Matt. You're completely right. And I want to just clarify where it depends on where we were in the process as to what question we were answering, I think. The 270 was the attempt to say, what was the minimum? Remember, we were in the cafeteria. So then it was like, okay, how do we get any auditorium in? And what was the minimum for the ed plan? So we came to peace with a 1 grade piece. What we weren't trying to meet the needs of at that point was the extracurricular. And, we sort of let go of what Justin was talking about. We let go of a lot of the music-based stuff and the musical. As this conversation shifted, now we're trying to respond to including some of those options and giving you information on how that would either benefit the educational side or not. So that's what we're responding to now. So you're right, Matt, it's evolved and it's been a little bit hard on our side to keep up to. The musical became a bit of my barometer, as well as the concerts and what we might be able to pull back from losing either at Sanborn or not having to go to the high school. I felt like the question we got asked as the community weighed in was like, okay, what's the school side of the need? I do think the musical staying at the middle school became a threshold, at least from my perspective. I think if we build seats, and now we understand it's not just seats, it's total seating in Sanborn, that probably is that number, which is why the 350 came up. And then, literally Justin and I are having these conversations at 6:30 in the morning in the car. So, we realized 350 didn't feel right. He had, we did the double back to count the portable seats that aren't out right now. So we had to get out of current day and go back to what life was pre-COVID to get to the number. So we're sorry it evolved that way. We wish it hadn't. I do think 420 from our side, if we're going to factor in now, which I think is what we're being asked, if we're going to factor in what Justin described and the concerts and the musical, which we weren't factoring in at 270, 420 is the spot we would say is sufficient. It would let us keep the musical at the new school. It would, I think, allow some concerts, if not, I don't know, when these educators get to such a beautiful facility with 400 seats plus, they may rethink whether they need to go to the high school and creatively rework that, is my intuition. So we think a little over 400 is about where we would be able to meet those needs now that we've been asked what that number is. So I apologize. It's been a little hard to follow. We agree.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Does my memory serve me right? And I've only been there a handful of times. Do you store those portables on the stage? Do I remember seeing them? No, because that's another issue. But it's a side point. I don't want to distract us.
We use the stage actually all the time.
A whole issue.
We use the stage for music instrumental instruction.
I'm just suggesting that would not be an ideal scenario to do 350 built in and then provide a little extra space for portables, just because you run into other space issues. Okay, Court, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a question about the 350 that we were considering earlier. Can you help me understand it on a very practical basis? If that were that the capacity, and we were to host a musical there, does it mean an additional performance, or does it mean that that family groups would actually be denied seeing their kids on the stage? How does the math work in terms of actual activity and participation?
I can answer that really quickly. In terms of the musical, which is the context that Court just asked, it would mean additional performances with a very strict messaging of, we have many families who like to come more than once. So, trying to manage that as well, which doesn't sound too fun, and making sure that each performance with the additional performances, everyone got to at least one of those performances. The current size, I'm fairly certain, because I happen to go to every performance as well. There's a good percentage of the audience who, again, comes to each performance, each show. And no one, to my knowledge, is it's always sold out, but I don't think we have a huge number of people who are closed out from coming.
All right, that's encouraging. Okay, thank you.
Chris Popoff.
Yeah, as we talk about numbers, it might be helpful to translate numbers of seats into net square footage. So we can be looking at big numbers. To pick up on Charlie's point, we're trading off allocating spaces to one place or another. And I think it would be helpful for the whole community to know that if it's 420 seats, what's the net square footage for that? If it's 350, et cetera. Also appreciating that maybe there's some adjustments in stage size and other parts of the square footage allocated to the auditorium. I think that's all going to be helpful as we move into schematic design, as we make these fine choices on the ranges that we're comfortable with for both the auditorium and the gym and all the other spaces in the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. I don't remember, Kristen, if your slides recognize the actual space. I do know that all too intimately that auditoriums are much more difficult and when you're looking at space than a gymnasium, as an example, because you're considering sight lines, acoustics, a lot of complexities to performing spaces. But I don't know if you have that information or just a order of magnitude, Kristen.
We do have it based on 12 square foot per seat, I think is what you should be thinking about. When you measure auditoria when they're completed, they can range anywhere between 10 square foot per seat and 12. So, obviously there are some that are even more generous, but again, that works itself in design. The layout and how efficient we can be and how it sits on the site and within the building will drive whether we're at the 12 square foot per seat or the 10, so that's a little bit, again, just too soon to pin that down. And so again, I would advise the committee to look at the program and what you're looking to meet. And I'm hearing from the school department that the 420 would serve that performing arts and academic, and so I would strive toward the program, and then when we lay it out, we will obviously always be looking to make it the most efficient layout possible, rather than getting hung up on the exact 500 versus 400 delta.
Right. It sounds like going from 270 up to 350 is in the range of about 1,000 square feet, and then it's about 1,800 to go up to the 420. So just as an order of magnitude, like difference between 1,000 to 2,000-ish. And I'm being loose, but.
Can I add to that really quickly? I think we're talking about, if we do 420 seats, plus we do the Mark Caruso 10,600 proposal, we're looking at 5,400 net square feet versus Lori's give of what it was, 2,600. So if you want to kind of get a gross sense of that, you know, we're well short of any goal toward maintaining status quo on square feet.
Right, we're just under halfway there.
Halfway, yes.
Exactly.
And I think the other side of that question is, you know, I mean, are we fixed on what we can do relative to trade-offs to the existing space plan to get those 5,400 additional net? Not saying we should. I'm just saying, you know, I think we should be open to that, because that was the gist of those recommendations, was go make a best effort and figure out what you can do and what you can't do. And I think we've got to assume that we need 5,400 if this is the direction we're going to take. And we ought to look at, well, okay, can we get that? And that means we really got to look at those numbers. And I think that's a committee process. Maybe it's through Court's committee, or maybe it's through this overall committee. Maybe it's through another group. I don't know, but it needs to be done.
Well, hold on a second. What are you saying needs to be done, Charlie?
Well, I think we need to take a serious look at the space plan to see if we can derive 5,400 net square feet to address the requirement for a 420 seat auditorium and a Mark Caruso sized gym of 10,600. Now, if you want to go with 350 seats, a different number. But I think we ought to be open to looking at the space plan in terms of, can we do more? The answer may be no, but you know, we need to do that. That's what I'm recommending.
What I struggle with is that we're on a timeline. I don't believe that it's a committee function to look back at the space summary and try to find other spaces to cut. I think that the educators have come to us with a proposal. We have some other proposals on the table. To me, it's a matter of, okay, where are we at in terms of how much this project would cost us if we were to go with the 9,776 square foot gym and the 420 seat auditorium with the 2,600 square feet cut out from the space plan. And then the committee has to decide, is that okay? Are we gonna go with that number, or are we gonna say we're gonna keep it at 100 million and that's what we're gonna tell the designers, and we're gonna have to figure out some more changes? But I don't think this is something that a committee can go back and scrub the space summary to find more savings.
And in February, we had, with the design subcommittee, looked through all sorts of alternatives of no team commons or no maker and all of that. And so now Lori's gone back in and resurfaced some of those. The work has been done in terms of scheduling efficiencies and reviewing alternatives. When we looked again, there's 100 square feet here or there, you know, if you want to make your storage smaller, and then you'll hear about that. You know, so I really, I think that and Lori, you can let me know, but what we arrived at back then when we tried for a even deeper cut was impacts to 21st century educational delivery. You know, impacts to the team teaching model. It wasn't, you know, that's what the next level cut brought us to at that time.
Yeah.
Peter Frashalis, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I feel like we've now become so focused on what seems to be, as Heather put it, a little bit of an arbitrary number. And I don't mean to state that lightly, but it seems like I'm getting uncomfortable with the cuts that we're talking about making into the program that Lori and her team have really worked hard to define. And so I would say I'm not comfortable saying we're going to do whatever it takes to hit 100 million. I think the direction was, let's work hard towards that. But let's not lose sight that we're building this school for 50 years, and we need to do this right. So I'm not sure how we move forward here, but I'm for one, I'm not comfortable saying, giving the direction to make these cuts and trade-offs in square footage. I think we in my mind, what I've heard from Kristen is, if we can give her some direction on the auditorium and the gym, that she will do everything she can, and her team will look at ways, and then we have the time to evaluate and process more. So just felt needed to say that.
Thank you, Peter. Court.
Yeah, I am mindful that when we state a number like 100 million, it does sound arbitrary. But there is another way of looking at that number, which is we could call it the current number. And some would say that's accurate, 99.2 or 100. We could call it the ed plan number. When we call it 100 million, it does sound on the street kind of arbitrary, but it was not an arbitrary process that got us to the current 99.2. I think we all agree it was a pretty deliberative, careful, open process. I would offer up that we have on the ed plan side, if you will, or the space summary side, consideration about alt PE that's very real, consideration about the makerspace, how it might be incorporated into the library. Thirdly, I would hope that the science labs get another look, because the ed plan does call out alternatives for science labs that I'm not sure Justin and Lori and Kristen have looked at again. That might be something that is a factor. Don't know.
We have looked at it.
Okay. All right.
I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, thank you. Okay, because you know that the ed plan does give us some flexibility there that we haven't looked at as a committee. And we know, I think, exactly now the range and alternatives from present to possible for gym and auditorium. So let's hang in there and look at combining these alternatives, but not with the idea that 100 is arbitrary, although it looks arbitrary. I want to assure people it's not. We didn't just decide to hit 3 digits and stop. We got there because that's what the space summary produced. Thank you.
Yeah, can I respond to that? And I want to agree with you, Court, that the 92.9 is not arbitrary at all. And so I don't want you to think that I was calling that arbitrary.
Oh no, I wasn't. Yeah, no, didn't mean that.
And I'll agree with you on more than that too. The 99.2 was a very well thought out number, and far from arbitrary. I think it's since the 99.2 came out that we got so much community feedback. And so we won't hash through that. And that's why we're looking at this. I would also, I agree that we want to continue looking at how to get as close as we can to that 100. And so I don't disagree with that. We want to do that. The select board asked us to be as close to 100 as possible, or to hit it if feasible. And I think that's very important. I also want to agree with Peter that maybe we can keep looking at, like Kristen said, there's a little bit of wiggle room here in some of what she's giving us. Some of it just has to go through schematic design to see. And with direction, hopefully we can see some of that. The point of the arbitrary was even between that, 99.2 and a little above it. If we're looking at as close to 100 as possible, I think it would be becoming, close to splitting hairs if we're taking away important functionality to make it, let's say, exactly 100 versus, I don't know, 101 or 102 or something like that. If we can get very close, we're talking about everybody compromising. And I think we are looking at compromising a lot here. And if we need to compromise on the alt PE space and the maker space, you know, as much as I said earlier today, I don't want to do that. I've processed it for the past couple hours too. If we need to make those compromises, maybe we do. But if that's the case, we're making some big compromises. And I think we need to ask everybody to also. And so I think we need to ask those who are asking us, bring it as close to 100 million as possible, to also be willing to compromise and be able to say to us, if we come in at, I don't know, 102 or 103 or somewhere, you know, close to it, that to be able to say, okay, we see that you have all made a lot of tough decisions and a lot of compromises, and we're also willing to compromise if it's a little over 100. And so that's where the term arbitrary was coming in, not in terms of our build up to here. And so I would like to see us go forward, making compromises, but also without a absolute harsh, hard line at 100, because I think that's taking away the ability to compromise on the other side.
Can I suggest, let me try this. I would like to entertain a motion that the Middle School Building Committee revise their vote on the not to exceed 108 million and lower that to not to exceed, if I've got the number right, 105 million. If that encompasses, and I can't do the math quick enough, if that encompasses all of the shifts that we've talked about today. I think it's important that we acknowledge that again, it's a not to exceed number, and that we acknowledge that we are bringing that not to exceed number closer to the 100 million in recognition of the select board and the finance committee. And Matt, I'm happy to hear from you.
Before we get a second on that motion, very quickly, I think the delta right now is about 3 million between Lori's give and the ask for the 420 seats and the 10,600. So I think that 105 is 2 million higher than what we would need to accommodate this. And before we settle on a number in your motion, I think we should talk about that number rather than getting locked in the way we did last time with the 108. So let's process this a little bit more before we second that motion.
Well, I've also wanted to be mindful of the agenda. If you look at the agenda, what it says is that we're going to vote the schematic design scope. It doesn't talk about budget.
Okay.
So I just think that we were getting pretty close to identifying those. I mean, there's already a number, a not to exceed number that's out there. It seems pretty clear now that it's not going to get up to that regardless. You know, with the I think in-flight decisions that are there. And so I would suggest maybe more of a motion that would encompass the reconsidering the space summary, you know, that was previously voted with regard to the gym and the auditorium spaces. I think that more fits in with our agenda anyway, and also that it's not inconsistent, I think, with the, you know, the budgetary targets and so forth that Pat, you were suggesting.
I would agree with that, Matt.
Yeah, and I do think, Matt, we want to include the space for the alternative PE and maker in that reconsideration, right?
So that's why I did not make the motion, because I knew I would not be able to be comprehensive about it.
No, that's okay. I just think it's a holistic in the spirit of giving a little compromising along the lines that's included, because those are spaces that are specifically called out in the space template.
That's right. And I mean, we need to be formal about this.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, does a motion need to have some type of a number cap in it, or is it enough to say, and I'm not making a motion yet, so we don't confuse ourselves here, but is it enough to, you know, to move something that is just what Matt said, reconsider the space summary with regards to the gym, auditorium, alt PE space, and maker space? Is that enough of a motion to give us the direction we need?
Why would we limit the space summary to those two spaces? I don't think you want to do that.
Okay,
Well,
so not limiting
the
it,
ones
that's
that we-
true.
We know about, right?
Good
I mean,
point,
others could
right.
come out in schematic design, but in terms of direction to the architects of what we know and can recommend, and I believe that Charlie, that Lori said that they had looked at some of these other things, and that's why the 2 spaces were offered up. It's not because they didn't look at the others.
So maybe it's with a specific focus on those areas, not that, which then wouldn't exclude anything else.
Yeah, you don't want to preclude other.
Yep.
No, and I don't think that this
Good point.
does. I think that the idea is that the previous space summary vote was based upon a set of spaces and that led to a certain set of square feet. And I think this is similarly programmatically, stating, okay, constraints around the gym, constraints around the auditorium, and then, the takeaways on the other side to yield a new space summary. And it's a net change from the previous one. So I think that you can only have to specify those net changes.
And I think it may be worthwhile to those following along what that means from a numbers standpoint. I'm doing super loose math, but if we're just looking at the scenarios that are in front of us, not anymore, but Kristen, I'm looking at your combination chart that goes up to I. If we're hearing correctly, the 420 satisfies the educational needs, the extracurricular needs, the auditorium needs. Is it the desired auditorium from the community and educators? No, it's a compromise, right? I think a desired auditorium would be larger and no one's here to speak to that per se, but I think if Lori and Justin were to speak for their departments, they would say that, of course they're going to want a bigger one that can hold more people. So the 420 satisfies quite a few needs and is the lowest of the, well, it's a replacing kind, if you will. And I use that term specifically because that's how the industry recognizes giving back something that, a project currently has, as not to, take away from what they're used to. And then a scenario of, I'm making my point because I'm using these specifically. Of the 2 options that have the 420 seats that I'm looking at with the revised gym, and I know the 74 by 42 and the 74 by 46 has some complexities in how that needs to all get worked out, and we talked at length about those already, but I'm looking at the highest number of that is 5.55 million with the 420 seats. So that's combination G and combination I, and those have different gym numbers. So I just took the worst case, that's 5.5. And I think, Kristen, you said the space that the alt PE, the 2600, the alt PE plus the maker saved us, was it 2.8 or something? And I'm talking project.
You said 2.7.
2.7. So give or take, it's about halfway there. Does that make sense? I'm just
It's about halfway. Yes, that's
it's
correct.
about halfway there. So we're halfway there on the space and we're halfway there on the numbers. So I just want to, I think this motion is more about the spaces themselves, but for those in the room that think about space as dollars, it's about half of the, it's about 2.7, 2.8 in that range. And again, it's, this all gets flushed out and we come to a final number at the real estimating at the end of SD. But in the spirit of speaking about space and cost, it's about halfway, gets us halfway there.
I agree with those numbers. Those are good. What I see.
So what other discussion do we need to have before someone's comfortable putting a motion forward?
I'm happy to make a motion. I just want to clarify that the motion does not need to include those numbers. They're kind of baked into the motion that we just discussed, right?
Yeah.
So why don't I make it? Because then we can further discuss it unless someone's going to need to. Let's see if I can do this correctly. I want to basically make the motion that Matt Johnson suggested. So Matt, if I'm not wording it correctly, please jump in. I would like to move that the committee take a relook at the space summary with the specific focus areas being the gym, auditorium, alt PE space, and maker space, which is not to preclude looking at anything else. Does that cover it all?
I think we are actually doing something more formal than that. I think we're approving a revised space summary based upon net change from the previously approved space summary of deleting the alt PE space, deleting the maker space, and adding additional space to the gymnasium in order to support two at minimum 74 by 42 foot cross courts on top of a MIAA regulation basketball court, however that works out, and a 420 seat auditorium instead of a 270 seat auditorium.
And if I could offer up, I continue to hope that that maker space would actually be incorporated in the library or media.
Well, and that, I think that's programmatic rather than space.
Right. I just don't want people to think it's disappeared.
It could be changed, the title of it in the space template could say media/maker so that it's not lost in the.
Yeah, minor point. I know everybody knows that, but I just want to.
Matt, I think you accommodated the comments discussion perfectly. I like your motion very much.
Sorry, just a point of clarification.
No one seconded it yet, however.
Well, I would second it.
We have two motions on the floor. Let's rewind a little bit and have Heather and Matt run it by us again.
Okay, so mine was purely that we relook at the space summary with a focus on those areas, not specifically to get rid of them or put numbers behind the others. That has not been seconded.
Could you accept the specificity that Matt put forward and withdraw your motion? Is that where we could go?
Okay, I will withdraw my motion. I'd like to clarify on Matt, I have a question. When you say take out the two spaces designated and you used numbers of the gym and auditorium of the smaller width and the 420. Was that at least those, or was that landing on those?
I think that we need to land on something if she's going to, design something.
If I heard him correctly, he said at a minimum the 42, recognizing that in the discussion we had
a wider
right,
courts with that dimension. Yeah.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
The auditorium, I think we need a defined number.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we heard 420 was acceptable.
The gym is as a minimum width of cross courts of 42. And the auditorium is a minimum of 420?
I think it is 420.
It's 420. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, maybe maximum. I don't know. No, 420. I think. I mean, yeah. Okay, if it's 418, I don't think anyone's gonna, or 422. I don't think anyone's gonna freak out. If you can squeeze another chair in because of the size of the room.
Oh.
Does that
So this
satisfy?
would be, yeah, this
Heather?
would be putting the schematic, putting a space summary forward for schematic design. I just wanted to remind everyone that at the conclusion of schematic design is when you lock in your space summary and your budget and everything based on the more detailed design.
Right, but this is to move to schematic.
Okay. That answers my question. Okay.
Okay.
So are we discussing this motion still?
Charlie, did you still want to second that with all of
Yes.
the?
Yes,
Yes?
I want to second
Okay.
the motion that Matt put forward. Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in that I'm uncomfortable that we're cutting back on the potential of cutting back on the other spaces. The community input was to do, and they weighed in saying they wanted a bigger gym and a bigger auditorium. They did not say, you know, cut other spaces. And I understand the financial impact, so I don't want to minimize that, but I'm uncomfortable at this point voting for something that's going to start cutting out those spaces. I would prefer to do something where Kristen, we endorse those spaces and we let Kristen go into design and optimize it and then come back to us. I realize that may not be possible, may not give her enough direction, but it does seem to me that we still have that flexibility, and now we're going to be limiting it to half of the space that was actually requested. So I won't support this motion.
Thank you, Peter. Chris?
I pretty much follow what Charlie has said, and I like the motion so far, but it might warrant an amendment because we don't want to lose sight of the other things we need to consider in order to have the spaces we want and the budget we want. And what I'm focusing on is the overall design and simplicity of this building. So I want the designers to look very carefully at adjusting, quite literally, the outline and footprint that has been up on our screen regularly for months now. It is complicated. And I genuinely believe that if we want to hit the spaces we want for a 21st century school, and we want the spaces in the auditorium and the spaces in the gym, we're going to have to look at that bridge that joins the team spaces to the front spaces. We're going to have to look at the outline of the building. And we're going to have to, in the words of Henry David Thoreau, simplify, simplify, simplify. And again, I think I've said this before, so I apologize to be a broken record. That simplification meets all kinds of needs. It will help us in the budget. It will help us on net zero and energy, and we can still have a very good design building. And the other point I'll make, pardon me for being long-winded, but I will express my impatience. I don't think it's appropriate for our project manager and our architects to tell us things like certain things might be sacrosanct and we don't design boxes. We're designing a public school. We're designing a school for the 21st century, and we can make this aesthetically as good looking as a public school can be. But in the spirit of adjustments, we may have to adjust some of the aesthetics that I think are being baked into this project. Long-winded thing, not really an amendment. So to simplify, I would amend the motion to direct our designers to look at those other space considerations and budget considerations, because I think they're really going to help us when we come out of schematic design to tell the public we've done our level best to keep this thing within a reasonable price. To sum up, if we get over that 100 million, all of this work will pay dividends. We will sound much more credible come town meeting to say the reason we hit 1025 or 103 or 101, somehow we got over 100 million is well supported because we've adjusted all of these things. Thank you. I've said enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
If that's an amendment, I'd like to second it and have us discuss it.
Okay. Seconded amendment discussion.
What was the specific amendment?
To consider the complexity of the design and reducing the complexity of the design for the sake of additional cost savings if possible. Am I summarizing that correctly, Chris?
Thank you, Dawn. You summarized it much better than I would have. But
I've never heard that before. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I think that summarizes that our designers are going to add.
That's what I heard. Yep. You're looking for simplification.
To the other parts of the motion, so we don't lose sight of other parts of the building where we can save space and efficiency. That makes sense, but I think Don summarized that well.
So how does that amendment jive with the motion itself? We've got a motion on the table that would take us to potentially 103 million, and with some space implications. If we simplify the building and we save 3 million, Does that mean we can bring this in at 100 million? Is that the intent of this motion? Or is the intent to take that 3 million and put it back into the makerspace and the you know, the other functions that are being modified? So quite frankly, I mean, my view would be that it ought to get us back toward the 100 million. It would be my view as to what the intent is, I would hope, but I don't know.
That would be the technical effect of the motion, because the motion is clear about deleting those other spaces. And so, you know, if further improvements due to design change, you know, or value engineering or whatever you want to call it, you know, could be implemented, that would bring the number further down. I don't think that Chris was, you know, speaking for Chris here, I don't think he was suggesting that it'd be a trade-off to trade back in some of the other changes.
Well, I just want us to be all sure that we are all on the same page with the motion, and I do support the motion, the amendment, and then that with that caveat.
Yeah, just thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Charlie. Yes, you focused on that. That is the goal, that this will help us toward that $100 million number.
Is there a second on the amendment?
Court did.
Okay, thanks. Can I discuss the amendment just one bit?
Yeah, we are. So please,
sure.
yes.
So I think someone mentioned a few weeks ago that, you know, we could, you know, eventually feel some regrets related to this project. You know, that was a fear that someone expressed. But I actually think, you know, if we're in the situation now where I may have some regret that we may land somewhere above 100 million, but who knows, maybe we can get there. CCYB may have some regrets about the 3-point line. You know, the arts community might have some regrets about the constrained size of the auditorium. The architect might have some regrets about the, you know, shape of the building, you know, in the glass bridge or whatever it is. And, you know, the educators could have some regrets about the makerspace. And, you know, I think that that's a sign that we may have actually achieved a good result. You know, when everybody hates it, it's perfect. You know,
have you been listening to my conversations this week, Matt?
Yeah, you know, and I think on the other hand, just as Stephen said, we can flip that coin and say, but it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is. And it's funny because I keep joking that, and, you know, and Kristen can appreciate this, in our line of work, we never make everyone happy. Like there's a point in the project that gets tough, and then you find a place where everyone gets excited about it and gets behind it. And I'm hopeful that, to your point, Matt, we're really close to that point, and that, you know, some of the compromise, I probably said the regret, because honestly, there's so many times that I've been like, what if we're doing this wrong? What if it's not the right building? What if, you know, and it's, you know, this is a huge, huge project for this town, and we do want to get it right, but we also want to, that doesn't mean spending tons of money. That means right sizing it for the needs of the town. And I think all of these things we've been talking about today, hopefully will move us in that direction, and feel really good about it, and, you know, move toward, to Linda's point, moving toward yes, right? So further discussion?
So I guess I would, oh, whoops, can I jump in?
Oh, you're good, you're good.
I would just say, I like the idea of what Chris is saying, to look at the design and look at, is there a way to simplify it and save any money there? The only where I would differ is that I would look at it and say, let's do that and see if we can fit back in either all PE space or maker space or some piece of it, or and address that functionality better. So that would be mine, which I guess ties me to the original, ties back to the original motion, which I know is not under discussion, but to me, the motion should leave room for increasing those if possible, or bringing them back if possible in schematic design, that kind of thing. So at this point, because it doesn't do that, I probably wouldn't support the amendment, not because I don't think we shouldn't look at simplifying the design, but because I feel like the result of that should go in another direction. And that, there you go, kind of shows me where I'm going with the original motion too. But that's where I am for now. Again, not that I don't want to look at all of these things, just that I think it should have a slightly different tint to it, which is to then try to bring back some of what we're losing if possible.
Thank you, Heather. Court? Sorry, Pat. I saw Court's hand go up.
Court, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, this will be very quick, but it might require another couple of minutes elsewhere. Given the magnitude of these decisions, we're trying to close this out with great clarity, with, as Matt brilliantly said, some compromise or accommodation by so many to bring this in where everybody can be reasonably satisfied. I think we need our clerk to get the motion in writing for us, any motion today, so that there's no revisiting necessary because of any lack of clarity. Hope we could do that.
I think we need to vote whether we're going to amend the motion first before.
Correct. Yeah, we have two motions on the floor right now. Yeah, all the more important to get them down in black and white, I hope. That's my request.
How do we make that happen? Sorry, logistics question, because this isn't my strong suit.
If we don't have a clerk, then we need to
don't
hear
have
it
a clerk.
again from the mover, and somebody writes it down, or you get it really clear and crisp on the recording.
Bill's been doing minutes. I think Ian's ready to weigh in.
Yeah, I saw Ian pop up, and I know they typically do these. I don't know if you have it live though, Ian. You're not muted, but I can't hear you, Ian.
Sorry, I've been taking notes
Oh,
as
there you go.
we're going along here, trying to record the motions as they come about in seconds and whatnot. So, and we go back through the videos because obviously this is recorded. So, just trying to get everything accurate. Absolutely.
He's asking for it now.
What do you think the motion is now?
I think the motion is that we design to a 420 seat auditorium, a minimum of the 242 by 74 cross courts. We remove the maker space, remove all PE space, and we review the complexity of the design for the building with the potential of other VE items and bringing back certain aspects of the ed space, the ed plan.
I think that
that last
bit
bit,
might get it right on the gym space.
The last
What
part.
Matt had said on the gym space was we're going to optimize to the MIAA court with the provision that we do our best to achieve 42 by 74 cross courts, but may need to make other adjustments and optimizations to get there. I think that was more the gist of it.
The amendment did not include bringing back anything. That was our comments and discussion following the amendment.
That was my
That was
understanding
my
as well.
opinion. That's not included.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if this is taped, and you can go back and record or take down, write out the exact motion that Matt and Chris offered from the tape. I would think that would be good enough rather than us trying to kind of voice over this thing right now and workshop it. I think that's too tough because it's too complex. If you go back to the way Matt said it, he said it exactly right. And I thought Chris's was also very clear. And I would recommend that we simply pull those out of the tape rather than trying to work this through here. It's too complex.
Which is standard practice. It's just court requested that it be done live.
Well, I'll put it another way. If they are happy with verbatim transcript as motion, then I'm happy. I just want, because we discuss these things, I want to reduce subsequent claims that things weren't clear. I want the movers to be very clear that what they put forward is what we're going to vote on.
Ian, you're going to take it verbatim off the video, and then when you send a draft, Pat and myself will cross-check it.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we did when we went back through the 415 vote. We watched the video and took it verbatim.
And just real quick to Ian's point, I think that will be very helpful for our design team as they move into schematic design, so they have clarity on what they're working on. That's really where this goal is about. We do have to decide it, but they have to understand what our goals are too. I withdraw my motion and make this new motion that you see on the screen, which adds Chris Popoff's amendment, incorporates that, and we now have it in black and white.
Protocol, sorry, we got to deal with the amendment
first.
Popoff's first.
All right, to help move this along, I will withdraw the amendment so we can start over with a new motion. That leads to Matt maybe withdrawing and recasting a new motion that incorporates. I withdraw my original motion and I move the motion that you see on the screen, that the middle school building committee revise its space summary recommendation to remove the makerspace and alternate PE space, to revise the size of the gym to accommodate 2 74-foot practice cross courts within the width required by the single MIAA main court, to revise the auditorium size to 420 seats, and to review the building design to seek opportunities to simplify and lower total project cost. Let's say that.
Matt, can I ask for one revision? Can you say to move into schematic design, to revise its space summary recommendation to move into schematic design? That's ultimately our goal.
Yes.
And I think it's implied. I just think it'll be helpful to have that language.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Matt, if I can just suggest that we also change the language to remove the makerspace space and alternate PE space. So we're not removing the functions, we're removing the spaces. So if we're going to remove,
that's what it says.
it says the makerspace is the name of the space.
So it needs to read makerspace
dedicated.
Okay. There you go.
Square footage for the, how about that?
Okay, fine.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion
Second.
and a second. Discussion. Pat, your virtual hand's still up. Was that about the language?
Take it down, take it down.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, thank you.
Oops, sorry, my mouse went crazy.
That's okay. No discussion? All right, I will call for the vote then. Let me get to my list so I don't miss anyone. And I should let everyone know before I get to him, Stephen Crane had to go. He sent me a note that he had collective bargaining, so we won't we won't hold that against him, but he won't be here to vote, so he's left the meeting. All right, so with that, he will not take a vote on this. Jared Stanton.
Yes.
Matt Johnson.
Yes.
Lori Hunter.
Yes.
Justin Cameron.
Yes.
John Harris.
Yes.
Russ Hughes.
Yes.
Kate Hanley.
Yes.
Peter Fashalis.
No.
Court Booth.
Yes.
Heather Bout.
No, sorry.
Frank Cannon.
Yes.
Chris Popov.
Yes.
Charlie Parker.
Yes.
Matt Root.
Yes.
Pat Nelson.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So the motion passes 16, I think. So 14-2, if I'm doing my math correctly. Okay, wow. We got through a lot today, guys, but I think to reiterate what others have said, thank you for sticking with that and letting us move into schematic design with clear direction. I just want to finish out the agenda. New business, is there anything? I'm not aware of anything. Public comment. If anyone is still with us, thank you for 3 hours of meeting. Any public, feel free to turn on your camera or raise your virtual hand. I will recognize you. No one. All right. Interesting. No comments today. And then lastly, adjournment. So I will entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Okay. Court? Do I have a second?
Second.
Second?
Okay, thank you. Jared?
Yes.
Matt Johnson?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Court?
Yes, thank you.
Heather?
Yes.
Frank?
Yeah.
Chris?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Matt Root?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Seriously, everyone, thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Don. Nice job, Don.
Thank you. Thank you.